Under the vast skies of the Asian steppes, where horses never truly rested and conquest was always a breath away, sleep was a fragile luxury. Tonight, we step inside a Mongol war tent, not as guests, but as warriors. Surrounded by clashing steel, shifting loyalties, and the eerie calm before battle, you'll discover why rest was rare, fear was constant, and silence was more dangerous than noise. If the raw edges of forgotten worlds help quiet your modern mind, then stay right here. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to keep journeying into the intense, untold corners of history, one calm night at a time. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. As night gathers its soft mantle across your consciousness, we embark on a journey through time to a land where the horizon stretches endlessly into the embrace of the sky. The wind speaks an ancient tongue here, rustling through grasses that bow and sway like ocean waves across the Mongolian steppe. It is a place where stars hang so low in the night sky they seem to whisper secrets to those who listen closely enough. Long before maps carried the name Mongolia, before empires rose and fell like the rhythm of breathing, these grasslands cradled a people shaped by the land itself. Their story begins not with conquest but with survival, a dance with the elements that would eventually forge one of history's greatest empires. Imagine standing amidst this sea of grass. The air is crisp and clean, carrying scents of wild herbs crushed underfoot and distant mountains. The steppe stretches toward every horizon, a landscape both nurturing and unforgiving. This was the cradle of the Mongol people, a harsh mother who taught her children resilience through winter's bite and summer's scorching embrace. The origins of the Mongols fade into the mists of time, their early history preserved not in written records but in the oral traditions passed from one generation to the next. What we do know is that life on the steppe shaped them in profound ways. Unlike the settled peoples to their south who built permanent homes and tilled the soil, these nomads followed their herds across seasonal pastures, developing a unique relationship with the animals that sustained them. The heartbeat of Mongol life was their herds, horses, sheep, goats, cattle, and sometimes camels. Each animal played its vital role in survival. Sheep provided wool for felt, meat for sustenance, and milk for dairy products. Cattle offered strength for heavy tasks. Goats contributed fine hair for textiles and additional milk. Camels carried heavy burdens across difficult terrain. But it was the horse, the precious Mongol horse, that truly shaped their culture and destiny. Small but hardy, these horses were unlike any others in the world. Standing just 12 to 14 hands high, they possessed remarkable endurance, surviving on minimal water and foraging through snow with their hooves to find grass beneath. A Mongol child learned to ride almost before learning to walk, creating a bond between human and horse that transcended mere transportation. The horse was companion, wealth, sustenance, and ultimately the key to an empire. The horse is like the wing of a bird, went an ancient saying among the steppe peoples. Without it, one cannot go anywhere. Life moved with the rhythm of seasons. Spring brought the birth of animals and renewal of grass. Summer offered abundant pasture for fattening herds. Autumn was for preparation, drying meat, making curds, gathering what few plants could be harvested. And winter, harsh and biting, tested survival skills with temperatures that could plunge far below freezing. The basic unit of society was the family, and families gathered into clans bound by blood ties. Several related clans formed a tribe, sharing common pasture land and moving together through the seasons. These tribes were often in conflict, competing for the best grazing or water sources, raiding each other for animals and women. Life was precarious, alliances shifted like the wind, and strength was valued above all else. At the center of Mongol life stood the ger, often called a yurt, a brilliant adaptation to nomadic existence. Imagine the warm sanctuary of this dwelling. Its circular walls made of latticed wood expand and collapse for transport. Layers of felt made from sheep's wool pounded with water until the fibers interlock, cover this frame, providing insulation against both cold and heat. A central opening allows smoke from the hearth to escape while drawing fresh air inside, creating gentle circulation. Inside the ger, life follows patterns established through countless generations. The entrance always faces south, away from the harsh northern winds. To the north sits the place of honor, where family treasures and religious items rest. The eastern side belongs to women and children, while the western side is for men and guests. The central hearth is sacred, the heart of family life where meals are prepared, stories shared, and traditions passed down. When you step inside a ger, the first sensation is one of surprising spaciousness. Though modest in size, perhaps 16 to 20 feet in diameter, the domed ceiling creates a feeling of openness. Colorful rugs and felt mats cover the floor. Low wooden chests store family possessions. The air carries mingled scents of wood smoke, dried herbs hanging from the walls, fermented mare's milk in leather containers, and the natural lanolin of the wool surrounding you. The Mongols moved with practiced efficiency, developed over generations. When the time came to seek new pastures, the entire dwelling could be dismantled in under an hour, packed onto horses or ox-drawn carts, and reassembled at the new location before nightfall. This mobility defined them, making them masters of adaptation rather than masters of place. Their nomadic lifestyle required a different relationship with possessions than settled peoples knew. Every item had to earn its keep through multiple uses or essential function. Beautiful things were often practical as well. Intricately carved bowls, embroidered clothing that told family stories while providing warmth, tools decorated with symbols that connected daily tasks to deeper spiritual meanings. The harsh realities of steppe life forged a resilient people. Children grew up quickly, learning the skills of survival from their earliest days. By age 5, a child might be responsible for minding younger siblings or helping with simple herding tasks. By 10, they were expected to contribute significantly to family work. This practical education prepared them for a world where cooperation meant survival and self-reliance was the highest virtue. Food reflected their nomadic existence, centered around animal products with minimal plant foods. Hearty meals of mutton, mare's milk, and various fermented dairy products sustained them through long days of physical labor. The most prized was airag, fermented mare's milk that provided both nutrition and mild intoxication. The Mongols developed ingenious preservation methods, air-drying strips of meat, creating hard cheese that could last months, collecting and drying wild berries and roots when available. Their relationships with neighboring peoples were complex. The steppe dwellers often viewed agricultural societies with a mixture of contempt and envy, looking down on those who remained fixed to the soil while occasionally raiding their settlements for goods the nomads couldn't produce. These raids were a traditional part of steppe life, a way to supplement resources and demonstrate martial prowess. Yet trade also flourished along the borderlands, creating connections that would later become crucial to empire building. Before Genghis Khan unified them, the Mongol tribes included the Tatars, Merkits, Naimans, Karaites, and many others. Each had their own territories, traditions, and tribal leaders. These tribes shared a common language and many cultural practices, but feuds and rivalries kept them divided. Blood vendettas could persist for generations, and alliances formed and dissolved with the changing winds of power. The climate itself shaped the Mongol character. Winters brought temperatures that could plunge to 40 degrees below zero, with howling winds sweeping across the plateau. Summer days could scorch with intense heat, the sun reflecting off the pale grass. This extremity bred adaptability and stoicism. A Mongol proverb captures this philosophy. Adapt or perish, like thee, rain adapts to the wind. Spiritually, the early Mongols practiced a form of shamanism common among steppe peoples. They perceived the world as filled with spirits, in mountains, rivers, trees, and animals. The eternal blue sky, Tengri, reigned supreme over all as father of creation, while the earth was honored as mother. Shamans served as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, conducting rituals, healing the sick, and interpreting omens. Fire held special significance, pure and sacred. The hearth fire represented family continuity and divine protection. To spit into a fire or contaminate it was a grave offense. Similarly, water sources were treated with reverence, for in a land where drought could mean death, the gift of water demanded respect. The Mongols developed a practical form of environmental awareness, understanding the delicate balance of steppe ecology centuries before such concepts entered modern thought. They moved their herds strategically to prevent overgrazing, protected vital water sources, and maintained a hunting ethic that preserved animal populations. Their survival depended on this intimate knowledge of the land. As night fell across the steppe, families would gather inside their gers, the glow of the hearth fire casting warm light on their faces. This was the time for stories, tales of heroic ancestors, lessons embedded in folk wisdom, epics that preserved tribal history and identity. Children listened with wide eyes as elders recounted adventures and moral teachings, transmitting cultural knowledge through the power of narrative. One such tale tells of a father who called his many sons together and handed each a single arrow, asking them to break it. Each son easily snapped his arrow. Then the father bound many arrows together and asked the same. None could break the bundle. Alone you are easily broken, the father said. Together you are unbreakable. This simple lesson contained the seed of what would one day transform these scattered tribes into history's largest contiguous land empire. Music filled these evening gatherings, the plaintive tones of the morenkur, horsehead fiddle, accompanying long songs that seemed to stretch like the steppe itself, notes held until the breath itself seemed to become visible in the air. The Urtian du, or long song, captured the expansiveness of the landscape, while faster, rhythmic pieces mimicked the galloping of horses. These songs carried the soul of a people across generations. Before the rise of Genghis Khan, the Mongols were but one of many nomadic peoples moving across Central Asia, living within cycles established through countless generations. They were skilled horsemen, resilient survivors, and fierce warriors when needed, but their influence rarely extended beyond local conflicts and seasonal migrations. No one could have predicted that these scattered tribes would one day create the largest land empire the world has ever known. As we leave this ancient landscape, imagine the silver moonlight washing over the steppe, turning the grass to a sea of platinum waves. In a ger, nestled within a shallow valley, a mother sings softly to her child, a future warrior perhaps, or a herder, or maybe one who will ride with the great Khan himself across continents yet unconquered. The hearth fire, flickers low, casting dancing shadows on felt walls as her voice blends with the night wind's whisper. This moment, multiplied across countless families and generations, forms the foundation of all that is to come. The stars wheel slowly overhead, marking time's passage in a land where human lives seem as brief as summer flowers. Yet the patterns they establish of survival, adaptation, and resilience will endure, becoming the bedrock upon which an empire will rise. But that is a story for another night, as we let the gentle rhythms of the steppe guide us towards sleep, like nomads, following ancient paths through dreams. The night deepens around us as our journey continues. Let the soft cadence of these words carry you to a different time, a different world. Close your eyes and feel the gentle rocking motion as though you were riding across the grasslands, the rhythm of hoofbeats lulling you toward peaceful dreams. Snow falls in gentle whispers across the steppe, collecting on the rounded roof of a solitary ger. Inside, a woman's labor pains intensify as her husband, Yesuge, a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, waits anxiously. The year is around 1162, though such precise dating means little to the nomads who measure time by seasons and generations rather than numbers. Outside, the winter wind carries flurries of snow that dance and swirl before settling on the frozen ground. Inside, warmth and tension build equally. When the newborn finally emerges into the world, the midwife places him in his mother's arms. Hoelun gazes down at her son, noting something clutched in his tiny fist, a blood clot the size of a knuckle bone. The elders nod knowingly at this omen. This child is born a warrior, they say, destined for power. His father names him Temujin, possibly after a Tatar chieftain he had recently defeated, transferring the enemy's power to his son through the shared name. Little did anyone suspect that this child, born in a simple ger on the windswept Mongolian plateau, would one day be known to history as Genghis Khan, ruler of the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever known. Temujin's childhood unfolded against the backdrop of the endless steppe, a world both beautiful and unforgiving. Imagine him as a small boy, his face wind-burned and serious beyond his years, learning the ways of his nomadic ancestors. By age 3, he was already sitting astride small horses, beginning the lifelong bond between Mongol and Mount that would eventually carry his armies to distant lands. The early years were relatively peaceful. As the son of a minor chieftain, Temujin enjoyed some status, though the Borjigin clan was not among the most powerful of the Mongol tribes. His father taught him to ride and hunt, to respect the spirits of the land, and most importantly, to understand the complex web of alliances and rivalries that governed steppe politics. When Temujin was around 9 years old, Yesuge took him on an important journey to the clan of the Olkunut, a sub-tribe of the Ongirat people. Following steppe tradition, the father had arranged for his young son to be betrothed to a girl from another clan, strengthening ties between families through marriage. The girl was Berta, slightly older than Temujin, with bright eyes that reflected wisdom beyond her years. The boy was to stay with Berta's family until coming of age, learning their ways and growing alongside his future bride, a common practice that helped create bonds between clans. But fate intervened with cruel timing. On his return journey, Yesuge stopped for a meal with some Tatar tribesmen, traditional enemies of the Mongols. Recognizing him, they poisoned his food. Though he managed to return to his own camp, he died shortly after. With Yesuge's death, everything changed for young Temujin. In the harsh reality of steppe politics, loyalty was to the leader, not his lineage. The clan quickly abandoned Holen and her children, unwilling to support a widow, and her offspring when resources were scarce. Like a hearth abandoned when the campfire moves on, as a Mongol saying described such rejected families. With contempt, they told her, "The deep water has dried up, the shining stone is shattered," meaning the source of her protection and prosperity was gone. Imagine the scene as Holen watches the clan depart, their jurs and herds disappearing across the steppe, leaving her with 5 children and almost no resources. The wind cuts through her deal, the traditional Mongol robe, as she gathers her children close, Temujin, his brothers, Kasar, Kajun, and Temuge, and his half-brother, Belgute. Her face shows no tears, though the abandonment is a near-death sentence on the unforgiving steppe. Instead of surrendering to despair, Holen became the foundation of her children's survival. She taught them to hunt for roots and wild onions along the banks of the Onon River. They learned to make hooks from needles to catch fish, to gather berries and wild apples, to snare small game. She wove nests for birds so they would lay eggs her children could collect. When food was especially scarce, they survived on milk mixed with water and blood drawn from their few remaining animals. The relatives who abandoned us are like flies that come only in summer, she told her children. Remember this time, if you survive it, you will be stronger than any who left us. Life became a constant struggle against hunger and the elements. The family moved between crude shelters, sometimes little more than branches and animal hides stretched against the wind. Their clothes grew tattered, their bodies thin. Yet through it all, Holen maintained her dignity and determination, instilling in her children both resilience and a simmering desire for vindication. These years of hardship forged Temujin's character. He learned that survival required vigilance, that trust must be earned, and that opportunity, when it appeared, must be seized without hesitation. The boy grew serious and observant, his eyes constantly scanning horizons both physical and political. These struggles also created an unbreakable bond between Temujin and his brothers. They hunted together, fought together, and protected each other with fierce loyalty. Their half-brother Belgute, though treated as an outsider by some because his mother was different, became particularly close to Temujin, who recognized the value of his strength and unwavering commitment. One story from these difficult years illustrates the developing character of the future Khan. While fishing with his brother Kasar, Temujin caught a fish but had it stolen by 2 strangers. Rather than accepting the loss, the boys tracked the thieves to their camp and waited until nightfall. Then, moving with silent determination, Temujin reclaimed not only his fish, but also a hook and line from the thieves. This small incident revealed his refusal to accept injustice and his strategic patience, traits that would later shape an empire. Another formative incident came when Temujin's older half-brother Begta began taking more than his share of the family's meager food and hunting spoils. After repeated conflicts, Temujin and Kasar made the fateful decision to kill Begta, ambushing him while he was sitting alone on a hillside. This harsh act reflected both the desperate conditions of their survival and Temujin's ruthless pragmatism when faced with threats to himself or those under his protection. When Holen learned what had happened, she was distraught, lamenting that her sons were becoming like wild animals. "You came from my hot womb with clots of blood in your hands," she told Temujin, "with the destiny of a ruler upon you. How could you destroy your own brothers when you cannot even destroy your enemies?" Her words carried both prophecy and rebuke, shaping the young man's understanding of leadership and loyalty. Not long after this incident, another disaster struck. A band of Taichiud, the same clan that had abandoned them after Yesugei's death, captured Temujin during a raid. Placing a heavy wooden collar on his neck, they kept him as a slave, moving him from camp to camp. For days and perhaps weeks, he endured this humiliation, his mind burning with plans for escape and eventual revenge. His opportunity came when the clan celebrated a festival, the guards growing careless with airag, fermented mare's milk. Temujin struck one guard with his wooden collar and fled into the night. As he lay hiding in a river, submerged with only his face above water, a man named Sorkon Shira discovered him. Rather than alerting the Taichiud, Sorkon took pity on the boy, helping him escape and providing him with milk and meat for his journey home. This unexpected kindness from a stranger made a deep impression on Temujin. He never forgot those who helped him in times of need, later rewarding Sorkon and his family with positions of honor when he gained power. Similarly, he never forgot those who wronged him, storing away slights and betrayals until the day he could address them from a position of strength. Upon returning to his family, Temujin discovered that they had given him up for dead, his mother having already cut her hair in mourning. Their reunion strengthened his resolve to improve their circumstances and reclaim the respect his father once commanded. As Temujin grew into a young man, he remembered his betrothal to Berta. Around the age of 16, he journeyed to the Ongirat people to claim his bride. Berta's father was initially reluctant, having heard nothing from Temujin's family for years and assuming the agreement had been forgotten in the wake of Yesugei's death. Yet he was impressed by the young man's determination and honored the original arrangement. Berta, now a beautiful young woman, returned with Temujin to his family's humble encampment. As a wedding gift, she brought a valuable black sable coat, a treasure among the nomadic peoples. This coat would soon play an unexpected role in Temujin's rise to power. Recognizing the need for protection and seeking to honor his father's memory, Temujin decided to present the sable coat to Togrul, the leader of the Karaite tribe and a blood brother to his late father. This strategic gesture reactivated an old alliance and placed Temujin under the protection of a powerful chief. Togrul, impressed by the young man's intelligence and ambition, accepted him as a kind of adopted son, providing crucial support in the years to come. Tragedy struck again when Merkid raiders attacked Temujin's camp, seeking revenge for an old wrong. Years earlier, Yesugei had abducted Hoelun from a Merkid man. The raiders captured Berta, carrying her away as a prize. For Temujin, this was an unbearable insult. With the help of his childhood friend Jamuka and the forces provided by Togrul, he pursued the Merkids, defeating them in battle and rescuing his wife. When Berta was returned to him, she was already pregnant, leading to questions about the child's paternity that would never be fully resolved. The boy, named Yochi, was accepted by Temujin as his son regardless, though the uncertainty would create succession issues in later years. This acceptance demonstrated both practicality and a personal loyalty that extended beyond biological certainty, another trait that would later help him build an empire of diverse peoples. Through these early years of struggle, loss, and occasional triumph, Temujin developed the qualities that would transform him from an abandoned child into a leader of unprecedented vision. He learned to recognize talent in others regardless of their background. He discovered the power of loyalty freely given rather than coerced. Most importantly, he came to understand that true strength lay not in momentary advantage, but in creating systems that could sustain and expand power. The steppe itself was his greatest teacher. Watching how wolves hunted in coordinated packs, He developed ideas about military organization. Observing how the hardy Mongol horses adapted to extreme conditions, he learned the value of mobility and endurance. The wide horizons encouraged him to think beyond the limitations that had confined previous steppe leaders. By his early 20s, Temujin had built a small but growing following. Unlike traditional steppe leaders who valued only noble birth and martial prowess, he recognized the contributions of craftsmen, herders, and others with useful skills. He promoted based on loyalty and ability rather than clan connections, creating opportunities for talented individuals who had been overlooked in the rigid tribal hierarchy. This meritocratic approach attracted followers from across clan lines, particularly those who had been marginalized in the traditional system. It also created enemies among those who saw his rise as a threat to established power structures. Chief among these was his former friend and ally, Jamukha, whose relationship with Temujin had soured into bitter rivalry. The two young leaders represented different visions for the steppe peoples. Jamukha adhered to traditional hierarchies and the primacy of noble bloodlines. Temujin advocated for a new order based on loyalty to a unified people rather than clan affiliations. Their intellectual and military contest would shape the future of the Mongol tribes and ultimately the world beyond the steppe. As night deepens and the story pauses, imagine Temujin standing on a hillside, gazing across the vast steppe that had both nearly killed him and formed him. The wind rustles through the grass, carrying scents of distant mountains and nights yet to come. In his eyes burns a vision beyond tribal squabbles and seasonal migrations, a dream of unity that will remake the world. The stars wheel slowly overhead, each with its own story, its own path across the endless blue of Tengri's domain. Like those stars, Temujin's path was set in motion by forces beyond his control. His father's death, his clan's betrayal, his years of hardship. Yet, unlike the stars, he could choose how to respond to these forces, could harness them to propel him toward a destiny of his own making. Sleep approaches now, gentle as the evening mist that rises from river valleys across the steppe. As your consciousness drifts, carry with you the image of that young man, not yet Genghis Khan, but already shaped by adversity into something extraordinary. A leader being forged in the crucible of survival, standing at the threshold of history with his face turned toward dreams of unity and power that would soon transform the world. The night grows deeper as our story unfolds like a silk scroll, revealing patterns that have long been hidden in the shadows of time. Allow your mind to drift back once more to the windswept plateau of Mongolia, where a young leader stands at the precipice of his greatest challenge. The scattered tribes of the steppe, like stars strewn across the night sky, await the hand that will at last draw them into a single, brilliant constellation. The path to unification began not with conquest but with vision. Temujin, still years away from the title Genghis Khan, understood what no steppe leader before him had fully grasped, that the true strength of the Mongol people lay not in their individual tribal identities, but in what they might become together. The ancient wisdom of the bundle of arrows that cannot be broken when bound together now guided his every decision. The steppe in the late 12th century was a fractured landscape of competing tribes: Merkids, Naimans, Karites, Tatars, Ongirats, and dozens of others, each with their own territories, traditions, and leadership. Blood feuds ran generations deep, alliances shifted with the seasonal winds, and unity existed only in brief moments when facing outside threats. Even the people who called themselves Mongols were divided into numerous clans and factions. imagine. A great council gathering under an autumn sky, smoke rising from multiple campfires as leaders from various clans come together. Temujin sits among them, not yet the most powerful, but increasingly respected for his strategic mind and growing band of loyal followers. His voice carries across the circle, speaking of shared ancestry and common purpose. "We fight each other over grazing lands," he tells them, "while outside powers grow strong on our weakness. We raid each other's camps for a few horses when together we could command treasures beyond imagination. The Chinese to the south call us barbarians, but it is our division that makes us small in their eyes." Not all were swayed by such words. Many clan leaders had prospered under the old ways, their power built upon traditional hierarchies and proven battle skills. Chief among Temujin's opponents was his former friend Jamuka, now his chief rival for leadership among the steppe peoples. Their relationship had once been so close they had declared themselves anda, blood brothers. But now their diverging visions for the future drove them apart. One critical innovation that distinguished Temujin's approach was his reorganization of traditional social structures. Rather than keeping tribal groupings intact when they joined him, he deliberately mixed warriors from different clans into new units based on the decimal system. These units, Arbans, 10 men, Jaguns, 100 men, Minghans, 1,000 men, and Tumens, 10,000 men, created new loyalties that transcended old tribal affiliations. A man's loyalty should be to his brothers in battle, not to the accident of his birth, Temujin explained when questioned about this radical restructuring. This approach broke the power of clan elders who might challenge his authority and created a more flexible, merit-based society where talent could rise regardless of origin. The growing tension between Temujin and Jamuka erupted into open conflict around 1187. Their forces clashed at the Battle of Dalan Baljut, where Jamuka demonstrated his adherence to old ways by boiling alive 70 young captains from Temujin's army in cauldrons, a traditional but brutal punishment. Temujin, outmaneuvered in this early confrontation, was forced to retreat with his remaining followers. Rather than destroying his ambitions, this defeat taught Temujin valuable lessons about leadership and loyalty. He noticed that despite their victory, Jamuka's coalition began to fracture almost immediately afterward, with various chiefs returning to their own territories and concerns. The traditional steppe pattern of temporary alliances followed by disintegration continued. Temujin, by contrast, used the defeat to refine his vision. He offered extraordinary loyalty to those who remained with him during difficult times and extended generous terms to former enemies willing to join his cause. One by one, warriors and smaller clan leaders were drawn to his banner, attracted by his reputation for rewarding merit and his protection of those who served him faithfully. A key moment in Temujin's rise came when he sheltered under the protection of Togrul Khan of the Karaites, leveraging the old alliance his father had established. Together they campaigned against the Tatars, traditional enemies of both the Karaites and Temujin's people. In this campaign, Temujin demonstrated both military skill and political acumen, strengthening his position while eliminating long-standing adversaries. The defeat of the Tatars marked a turning point. Temujin ordered the execution of all Tatar men taller than the linchpin of a cart, essentially all adult males, while incorporating women and children into his own growing confederation. This harsh measure eliminated the possibility of future Tatar resistance and served as a warning to other tribes considering opposition. It also demonstrated his willingness to break with certain steppe traditions when necessary for his larger goals. Following this victory, relations between Temujin and his patron Togrul began to deteriorate. the older Khan grew concerned about his protégé's increasing power and was influenced by his son's jealousy of Temujin's success. When Togrul's son attempted to ambush Temujin, the alliance shattered completely. In the subsequent conflict, Temujin defeated the once powerful Karaites, absorbing much of their population into his growing confederation and eliminating another major steppe power. By 1203, Temujin had defeated or absorbed most of the major Mongol tribes and many neighboring peoples. His former blood brother Yamuka, now without significant forces of his own, was eventually captured by his own remaining followers, who hoped to curry favor with the ascendant leader by delivering his chief rival. When these men brought Yamuka before him in chains, Temujin demonstrated the values that set him apart from traditional steppe leaders. He executed the men who had betrayed their own lord, stating, "Men who betray their Khan cannot be trusted." Then he offered Yamuka a place at his side once more, willing to restore their brotherhood despite years of conflict. Yamuka, recognizing that the steppe had room for only one vision to prevail, declined the offer. "There is room for only one sun in the sky," he reportedly told his former friend. Instead, he requested a noble death without the shedding of blood, as befitted his status. Temujin granted this wish, having his former friend's back broken, a death considered honorable among the steppe peoples. With Yamuka's passing, the last significant challenger to Temujin's authority among the Mongol tribes was gone. In the spring of 1206, a great Kurultai assembly was convened on the banks of the Onon River. Leaders from all the conquered and allied tribes gathered to formalize what had already become reality, the unification of the steppe peoples under a single leader. It was at this historic gathering that Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title often translated as universal ruler or oceanic leader, though its exact meaning remains debated by scholars. The moment of his confirmation was marked by simple but profound ceremony. A respected shaman named Kokochu, who had taken the title Teb Tengri, most heavenly, proclaimed that the eternal blue sky itself had chosen Temujin to rule all peoples. The assembled leaders raised Genghis on a felt blanket, traditionally used for enthroning steppe leaders, and pledged their loyalty to him and his descendants. The newly proclaimed Genghis Khan wasted no time in establishing the administrative structure that would transform a collection of nomadic tribes into the nucleus of an empire. He appointed his most trusted generals and advisors to key positions, created a personal guard of 10,000 elite warriors, and formalized the decimal organization of his forces. Perhaps most significantly, he commissioned the creation of a legal code called the Yasa, which established consistent laws across his domains. While the complete text of this code has been lost to history, contemporary accounts suggest it included provisions protecting diplomatic envoys, establishing religious tolerance, prohibiting the kidnapping of women, regulating hunting practices, and creating a regular postal system. The Yasa represented a revolutionary concept on the steppe, the idea that law could transcend tribal custom and apply equally to all. The unification of the Mongol tribes was remarkable not only for its military achievements, but for its cultural and social innovations. Genghis Khan established a writing system for the Mongol language, adapting the Uyghur script to create the first written records of Mongol history and laws. This development transformed an oral culture, allowing for more consistent administration and the preservation of knowledge across generations. He also created the first meritocratic society in the region, where advancement depended on loyalty and ability rather than birth or wealth. A shepherd's son could rise to command thousands if he demonstrated skill and commitment. This openness to talent from all sources gave the unified Mongols access to a much broader pool of ability than their hierarchical neighbors. The night has deepened around us as we've followed this story of transformation. Imagine now the quiet pride that must have filled Genghis Khan as he gazed across the assembled tribes at that first Kurultai. Peoples who had fought each other for generations, now standing together under a single banner. The scattered stars had indeed been drawn into a new constellation, one that would soon shine across much of the known world. For Genghis Khan personally, the unification represented the culmination of a journey from abandoned child to supreme leader. The boy who had once been forced to survive on wild roots and small game now commanded the combined strength of all the steppe peoples. The family that had been betrayed and left to die now formed the nucleus of a new ruling dynasty that would endure for generations. Yet with this triumph came new challenges. The unified Mongol nation, powerful as it was, still faced limitations imposed by the steppe environment. Periodic droughts could devastate herds, traditional sources of wealth were limited, and the growing population required resources beyond what their traditional territories could provide. To sustain unity and prosperity, Genghis Khan would need to look beyond the grasslands that had shaped his people for centuries. His gaze turned first to the settled civilizations that surrounded the steppe. The Jin dynasty in northern China, the Xia in the west, the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia. These wealthy states had long manipulated the steppe tribes against each other, using diplomatic gifts, trade restrictions, and occasional military expeditions to maintain their advantage. Now, for the first time, they faced a unified nomadic power with the mobility, military skill, and leadership to challenge their dominance. As the first stars of morning begin to appear in our imaginary sky, we leave Genghis Khan at this pivotal moment. Having accomplished what many thought impossible in unifying the steppe peoples, yet standing at the threshold of even greater challenges and opportunities. The constellation he had created from scattered stars would soon extend its light across continents, forever changing the course of world history. Sleep comes gently now, like the soft footfalls of horses across the steppe grass. As your consciousness drifts toward dreams, carry with you the image of that assembly by the Onon River. Diverse peoples coming together under a vision larger than their differences, forming a new identity that transcended the limitations of the past. In this moment of unity, found after centuries of division, perhaps there lies a dream worth pondering as you drift into peaceful slumber. The deepest hours of night envelop us now, that sacred time when the veil between consciousness and dreams grows thin. Let your mind drift across the centuries to a world being remade through innovation and daring. The unified Mongol nation stands, poised at the edge of the steppe, gazing outward at civilizations that had long considered the nomads little more than a nuisance. None could foresee how thoroughly the world's military, political, and cultural landscapes were about to transform. The sound comes first, a distant rumble like approaching thunder felt through the earth before it reaches the ear. Then a cloud of dust on the horizon growing larger with alarming speed. Finally they appear, thousands of mounted warriors moving with the precision of a single organism, each rider seeming to merge with his mount as though centaur-like, half human and half horse. This was the Mongol army under Genghis Khan, a revolutionary military force that would rewrite the rules of warfare and conquest. To understand how a relatively small, nomadic population conquered the largest land empire in history, we must examine the revolutionary military strategies and organizational structures that transformed the traditional raid-based warfare of the steppe into a system capable of sustained conquest and administration of vast territories. The foundation, of Mongol military power was the horse, not merely as transportation, but as the center of a relationship between rider and mount that began in earliest childhood. Mongol children learned to ride before they could walk, developing an instinctive bond with their horses that allowed for maneuvers impossible for more conventionally trained cavalry. Each warrior maintained a string of 3 to 5 horses, rotating mounts during campaigns to keep them fresh and allowing the army to cover distances that seemed impossible to their adversaries. The horses themselves were unique, small by European or Middle Eastern standards at just 13 to 14 hands, high but incredibly hardy and adapted to the harsh conditions of the steppe. They could survive by foraging even in winter, pouring through snow to reach grass beneath, and required no grain supplementation. They could travel up to 100 miles in a day when necessary and navigate terrain that would defeat larger, more pampered mounts. "The horse is a Mongol's wings," goes an ancient saying. Without his horse, a Mongol is but a bird with clipped wings. The basic unit of the Mongol military was the arban. 10 men drawn from different tribes but bound together through intense loyalty and shared experience. 10 arbans formed a jagun, 100. 10 jaguns created a minghan, 1,000. And 10 minghans constituted a tumen, 10,000. This decimal organization allowed for remarkable coordination of large forces and created a promotion pathway based on merit rather than birth. Perhaps most revolutionary was the psychological transformation Genghis Khan achieved. While earlier steppe warriors fought primarily for personal glory and immediate rewards, he created a force that operated with discipline and strategic patience. Rigorous training, clear chains of command, and a shared identity as Mongols rather than members of particular tribes produced an army capable of executing complex battle plans over extended campaigns. The primary weapon of the Mongol warrior was the composite bow, a marvel of engineering made from layers of horn, sinew, and wood laminated together to create remarkable power in a compact design. Capable of shooting with accuracy at 200 yards and penetrating armor at closer ranges, this bow made each Mongol horseman a mobile weapons platform. Warriors trained from childhood to shoot in any direction while riding at full gallop, including the famous Parthian shot delivered while appearing to retreat. The conquest of distant lands required more than just mobile archery, however. The Mongols quickly adopted and adapted siege technologies from the civilizations they encountered. Chinese engineers taught them to build and operate catapults, trebuchets, and other artillery. Persian and Arab experts helped develop techniques for breaching city walls and conducting sieges. Rather than rejecting foreign knowledge, Genghis Khan eagerly incorporated it, creating a continuously evolving military capability. Imagine a misty morning as Mongol generals gather around a simple map drawn in the dirt. Genghis Khan outlines a complex maneuver involving multiple tumens approaching from different directions, timing their movements to create the impression of a much larger force. Some units will deliberately reveal themselves to draw enemy forces into a premature attack, while others remain hidden until the moment of maximum advantage. The generals nod in understanding. Such coordination would have been impossible in the tribal armies of previous generations. Communication across vast distances was essential to Mongol success. They established the Yam system, a network of relay stations positioned a day's ride apart throughout their territories. Riders could travel between stations, exchanging horses for fresh mounts, allowing messages to move at unprecedented speeds, up to 200 miles per day. This communication network became the nervous system of the empire, allowing for coordination of military movements and administration across continents. The Mongols mastered the art of psychological warfare, understanding that fear could be as effective as arrows in defeating an enemy. Before attacking major targets, they would often completely destroy smaller surrounding settlements, allowing survivors to flee to the main city with tales of Mongol ferocity. They cultivated a reputation for unstoppable momentum, offering generous terms to those who surrendered immediately, but terrible consequences to those who resisted. A famous example occurred during the campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire in 1219–1221. When the city of Samarkand surrendered after minimal resistance, its population was largely spared. When nearby Urgench chose to fight, its ultimate defeat resulted in the execution of most of the male population and the enslavement of women and children. News of this contrast spread rapidly, influencing the decisions of other cities facing Mongol armies. Genghis Khan's strategic genius extended beyond battlefield tactics to grand strategy. He understood that conquest was only valuable if it could be sustained and transformed into lasting benefit for his people. Unlike earlier steppe conquerors who raided for immediate gain, he developed systems for extracting ongoing tribute and trade advantages from conquered territories. One of his most significant innovations was the protection of trade routes across the conquered territories. The resulting Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, created unprecedented commercial opportunities, with merchants able to travel from China to the Mediterranean under consistent protection and laws. This trade network brought wealth flowing back to the Mongol homeland and exposed the previously isolated steppe peoples to technologies, luxuries, and ideas from distant civilizations. Consider this scene. A merchant caravan winds its way along the ancient Silk Road, carrying silk, spices, and porcelain westward. The traders travel confidently wearing metal tablets called paisa that identify them as under Mongol protection. At regular intervals, they stop at carefully maintained way stations where fresh water, basic provisions, and information about road conditions await them. This security and infrastructure represented a revolution in transcontinental commerce, made possible by Mongol military dominance and administrative innovation. The organizational structure of Mongol forces demonstrated remarkable flexibility. While maintaining overall coherence through the decimal system, units were assigned to different roles based on their strengths. Heavy cavalry, primarily Mongols wearing lamellar armor and carrying lances in addition to their bows, formed the elite striking force. Light cavalry, often from allied Turkish tribes, performed reconnaissance and pursuit. Specialists in siege warfare, many recruited from Chinese and Persian territories, brought technical expertise to operations against fortified positions. This adaptive approach extended to military doctrine as well. Rather than adhering to a single method of warfare, Mongol commanders chose tactics based on terrain, enemy composition, and strategic objectives. The same army might employ hit and run, harassment in one campaign, methodical siege operations in another, and bold frontal assaults in a third, confounding enemies who expected consistency. The Mongol battle formation itself was revolutionary, typically arrayed in 5 parts, working in coordination. The Mangudai, a small advance force, would make contact with the enemy and then feign retreat, drawing opposing forces into a premature attack and disrupting their formation. The main body consisted of the Jungha, left wing, Baragun, right wing, and Kol, center, which would envelop the pursuing enemy, attacking from multiple directions. A final reserve force, often hidden from initial view, could deliver the decisive blow against an already confused opponent. Perhaps the most famous Mongol tactic was the feigned retreat, elevated from a simple maneuver to a complex operational. Mongol units would engage an enemy briefly before withdrawing in apparent disorder, encouraging pursuit. This retreat might continue for days, drawing the enemy away from their supply lines and separating faster from slower units. When the pursuing force was sufficiently disorganized or exhausted, the Mongols would suddenly turn and attack, often having led their opponents into an area where hidden forces could emerge from concealment to complete the encirclement. This tactic succeeded repeatedly despite becoming well known, as the supreme horsemanship of Mongol warriors allowed them to maintain cohesion during apparent retreats, while their pursuers typically became scattered and vulnerable. Even armies that understood the trick often found themselves unable to resist the temptation to pursue when the Mongols appeared to flee. The campaigns that followed the unification of the Mongol tribes demonstrated the effectiveness of these revolutionary approaches to warfare. The first major test came against the Jin dynasty, which ruled northern China and had long manipulated steppe politics to maintain their security. Beginning in 1211, Mongol forces under Genghis Khan launched a series of campaigns that systematically dismantled Jin defenses, including the capture of sections of the Great Wall, a barrier specifically designed to keep steppe nomads at bay. Night has grown quiet around us now, the deepest hours when the world seems to pause its breathing. Imagine a Mongol camp on the eve of battle. Thousands of felt tents arrayed in precise order, reflecting military units, small campfires dotting the landscape like earthbound stars. Inside one larger tent, illuminated by butter lamps, Genghis Khan meets with his commanders. Maps drawn on silk show terrain features and the position of enemy forces. The generals speak in low voices, each understanding his role in the complex maneuver planned for dawn. Outside, a horse whickers softly. The night wind carries the scent of burning dung fires and the murmur of thousands of men preparing for battle, checking arrows, tightening bowstrings, offering quiet prayers to Tengri and the spirits of their ancestors. Some sing softly, ancient melodies that connect them to the steppe homeland now far behind them. These men are no longer merely tribal warriors but professionals in the art of war, their identities transformed as thoroughly as their military organization. The most severe test of Mongol military capability came in the campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire, stretching across modern Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Afghanistan. This conflict began over the mistreatment of Mongol merchants and ambassadors, a grave offense under Genghis Khan's legal code. The resulting war saw Mongol forces operating thousands of miles from their homeland, adapting to unfamiliar desert and mountain terrain while facing one of the most powerful Muslim states of the era. The campaign demonstrated the full spectrum of Mongol military genius. Cities that surrendered were generally spared. Those that resisted faced devastating consequences. Major urban centers, including Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench, among the greatest cities of the Islamic world, fell to Mongol siegecraft. The Shah of Khwarezm, rather than standing with his people, fled from city to city before finally seeking refuge on an island in the Caspian Sea, where he died in isolation as his empire crumbled. The conquest of Khwarezm revealed another aspect of Mongol strategy: the use of terror as a calculated tool. The complete destruction of cities that resisted served a dual purpose. It eliminated centers of potential rebellion in the Mongol rear, and it spread paralyzing fear ahead of advancing forces. Tales of Mongol ferocity traveled faster than the army itself, undermining enemy morale and encouraging surrender before a single arrow was fired. Yet alongside this calculated brutality existed remarkable pragmatism. Genghis Khan showed no interest in forcing conquered peoples to adopt Mongol customs, language, or religion. His concern was with obedience and tribute, not cultural assimilation. This practical tolerance allowed the Mongols to administer vast territories with relatively small numbers, cooperating with local elites who were allowed to maintain their positions as long as they acknowledged Mongol authority and ensured the flow of tribute. The The night deepens further as our story continues to unfold. The stars wheel slowly overhead, their patterns unchanging, while empires rise and fall beneath them. The genius of Genghis Khan lay in his ability to transform the age-old patterns of steppe warfare. Seasonal raiding, tribal competition, limited objectives, into a sustained system of conquest and administration spanning continents. By the time of his death in 1227, the unified Mongols controlled a vast territory stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. His successors would extend this empire still further, creating the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The military innovations that made this possible, decimal organization, superior mobility, psychological warfare, consistent discipline, and strategic flexibility, represented a revolution in warfare as profound as any in history. Sleep approaches now, gentle as the falling dew. As your consciousness drifts toward dreams, carry with you the image of those Mongol horsemen moving across the landscape, their formation as precise as a flock of birds wheeling through the sky. Consider how this nomadic people, through innovation and adaptation, transformed themselves from scattered tribes into history's most successful conquerors. Not through overwhelming numbers, but through superior organization, mobility, and strategic vision. The thundering hooves that announced their arrival have long since faded into silence, but the changes they brought to warfare, commerce, and cross-cultural exchange continue to echo through the centuries, shaping our world in ways both visible and hidden. Let this thought accompany you into the realm of dreams, where perhaps you too will ride with the wind across the endless steppe, free as the eagles that soar above it. As the night cradles you in its gentle embrace, let us turn our attention away from conquest and battle to explore a more intimate landscape, the daily rhythms and textures of Mongol life. Beyond the thundering hooves and whistling arrows that captured the imagination of contemporaries and historians alike, there existed a rich tapestry of customs, traditions, and simple human moments that formed the true heart of the Mongol world. Dawn breaks over a Mongol encampment nestled in a shallow valley. The first light of morning paints the rounded tops of gers in hues of gold and amber. Smoke rises in thin columns from central smoke holes, carrying the scent of burning dung and morning meals. A child emerges from one dwelling, rubbing sleep, from eyes still heavy with dreams, while nearby a woman begins the day's first milking. This scene, replicated across countless valleys and plateaus, formed the foundation upon which an empire was built. At the center of Mongol daily life stood the ger, the ingenious portable dwelling perfectly adapted to a nomadic existence. Called yurt by many foreigners, a term borrowed from Turkic languages, the true Mongol name, ger, simply means home. And indeed, these structures were far more than mere shelter. They were the physical embodiment of Mongol cosmology and social order. Let us step inside such a dwelling, ducking slightly, to enter through the wooden doorframe always oriented southward, away from the harsh northern winds. The interior opens into a surprisingly spacious circular room, typically 16 to 20 feet in diameter. Daylight filters through the smoke hole at the center of the domed ceiling, supplemented by the glow of the hearth fire below it. The air carries mingled scents, sheep's wool from the felt walls, wood smoke, dried herbs hanging from the lattice. Framework, the mild tang of fermented mare's milk in leather containers, and perhaps the savory aroma of mutton simmering in an iron pot. The organization of space within the ger reflected the Mongol understanding of the world. The northern section directly opposite the door held the place of honor, where family treasures, religious items, and perhaps an image of Genghis Khan might be displayed on a low table. The western side belonged to men and male visitors, while the eastern portion was the domain of women and children. The central hearth represented the connection between earth and sky, the fire's smoke rising through the smoke hole to connect with the eternal blue sky above. "The Jia walls may be thin," goes a Mongol saying, "but they keep the family's warmth inside and the world's troubles outside." The construction of these dwellings represented a triumph of nomadic engineering, refined over centuries to meet the demands of mobility and extremes of climate. The circular lattice walls, khana, expanded or contracted like modern accordion doors. Roof poles, uni, radiated from a central compression ring, tuno, to the top of the wall section. Over this framework, layers of felt provided insulation against both winter cold and summer heat. During severe winter weather, additional layers might be added, while in summer, the felt sides could be rolled up to allow cooling breezes. A family could dismantle their entire dwelling in under an hour, load it onto oxen or camels, travel to new pastures and reassemble it before nightfall. This mobility defined the Mongol relationship with possessions, valuing objects that served multiple purposes, were durable, and held their worth in any location. Daily life followed the rhythm of seasons and the needs of animals. Spring brought the birth of new livestock, lambs, kids, calves, and foals, marking a time of renewal and increased milk production. Summer offered rich pastures for fattening herds in preparation for winter's scarcity. Autumn was the season for preparing winter supplies, drying meat, making felt, gathering and storing animal dung for fuel. Winter tested survival skills with temperatures that could plunge to 40 degrees below zero, demanding careful conservation of resources and protection of vulnerable animals. The Mongol diet centered around what their herds provided. Meat and dairy products formed the foundation of nutrition, with minimal plant foods. A typical day might begin with dried curds, arul, softened in tea, followed by a midday meal of boiled mutton. The evening meal often featured more substantial dishes like korkog, meat cooked with hot stones, or booze, steamed dumplings filled with mutton and onions. The most important staple was airag, fermented mare's milk that provided both nutrition and mild alcoholic content. Producing airag was a social activity. The milk required constant agitation in large leather bags to properly ferment. Family, members and visitors would take turns pounding or stirring the bags while sharing news and stories. The resulting drink, slightly effervescent, tangy, and mildly intoxicating, was considered both nourishment and medicine. "A Mongol without airag," went a saying, "is like an eagle without wings." Clothing adapted to the extreme climate while expressing cultural identity and status. The standard garment for both men and women was the deel, a long robe-like coat with a high collar and long sleeves. Winter deals were made from sheepskin with the wool turned inward, providing exceptional insulation. Summer versions might be crafted from lighter materials like cotton or silk obtained through trade. The deal was secured with a sash that served multiple purposes, supporting the back during long rides, providing a place to hang essential tools, and sometimes concealing a small pouch of precious items. Footwear consisted of boots with upturned toes, a design that prevented riders from catching their feet in stirrups and also adapted well to walking on the steps' uneven ground. Hats varied with seasons and status, from simple felt caps to elaborate fur-trimmed designs for nobles and leaders. In the intense winter cold, face coverings might be added, leaving only the eyes exposed to the elements. The rhythm of a typical day began before sunrise, especially for women who handled the first milking and breakfast preparation. Men would check on animals and plan the day's activities, whether hunting, moving herds to fresh pasture, or maintenance tasks like repairing tack or tools. Children joined in work appropriate to their age and ability. Young children might watch over smaller animals near the camp, while older ones participated in herding, milking, or food preparation. The Mongol relationship with horses fundamentally shaped their culture. Unlike many other societies where horses belonged primarily to nobility or warriors, in Mongol society, horses were ubiquitous. Even modest families maintained several, and wealthier ones might possess hundreds. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk, usually without saddles at first, developing a natural balance and oneness with their mounts that amazed foreign observers. The horse provided not just transportation, but a deep emotional connection. Mongols sang to their horses, composed poetry about them, and believed certain horses possessed spirits that could communicate with the divine realm. A wealthy person might be buried with a favorite mount, ensuring companionship in the afterlife. The ceremony of presenting a child with their first personal horse marked a significant life transition, comparable to coming-of-age rituals in other cultures. Family structure reflected both pragmatic needs and cultural values. The nuclear family formed the basic unit, but extended family connections remained vital for survival and advancement. Marriage was primarily an alliance between families. Rather than a romantic union, though affection often grew over time, marriages were typically exogamous. Partners came from different clans, which helped build broader social networks and prevented genetic isolation among small population groups. The night deepens around us as our story continues. Imagine sitting within a ger as darkness falls, the only light coming from the central hearth. Family members gather close, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. An elder begins a story, perhaps an origin tale of the Mongol people or an account of Genghis Khan's early struggles. Children listen with wide eyes, absorbing not just entertainment, but cultural knowledge, ethical lessons, and historical memory. This oral tradition preserved the collective wisdom of generations, transmitted through the power of narrative. Music filled these evening gatherings. The haunting sound of the morin khur, horsehead fiddle, accompanying long songs that seemed to stretch like the steppe itself. The Urtian Du, long song, featured sustained notes that required remarkable breath control, creating melodies that evoked the vastness of the landscape. Throat singing, the art of producing multiple pitches simultaneously, added another dimension to these musical expressions, creating overtones that seemed almost supernatural to uninitiated ears. The cycle of life was marked by rituals that blended practical concerns with spiritual significance. Birth ceremonies welcomed new members while acknowledging the precariousness of survival in a harsh environment. A child's first haircut, typically at age 3 to 5, became an occasion for family gathering and gift-giving. Coming-of-age observances prepared young people for adult responsibilities, while marriage ceremonies solidified alliances between families and clans. Death rituals reflected Mongol cosmology and pragmatic adaptations to nomadic life. Traditional practices included sky burial, placing the deceased on elevated platforms where natural elements and birds would return the body to the cycle of nature. This practice acknowledged both the difficulty of digging graves in frozen or rocky ground and the belief that the spirit needed freedom to begin its journey to the next world. After Genghis Khan's unification and expansion beyond the steppe, Mongol daily life incorporated influences from conquered civilizations. Chinese silks replaced some traditional textiles. Persian architectural elements appeared in the more permanent structures built in administrative centers. Culinary techniques and ingredients from diverse regions enriched the traditional diet. Yet through these adaptations, core elements of Mongol identity persisted: mobility, resilience, and a worldview shaped by the endless horizons of the steppe. The relationship between humans and the natural world took distinctive form in Mongol culture. Unlike agricultural societies that sought to dominate and transform the landscape, nomadic Mongols adapted to existing ecological patterns. They followed the natural productivity of different areas through seasonal migrations, developing an intimate knowledge of plant cycles, water sources, and weather patterns. This adaptive approach extended to environmental ethics. Water sources were treated with particular reverence. Polluting a spring or stream was considered not just wasteful, but spiritually offensive. Hunting followed specific rules to prevent overharvesting, with certain seasons designated for particular game animals. Even the collection of dung for fuel followed patterns that allowed for natural regeneration of grasslands. The night grows deeper as we continue our exploration of this vanished world. Consider how the daily rhythms of Mongol life connected to larger cosmic patterns. The circular shape of the ger mirrored the apparent path of the sun through the sky. Seasonal migrations followed the eternal cycle of renewal and dormancy. The eternal blue sky, Tengri, watched over all, while Mother Earth, Etugen, provided sustenance. In this worldview, humans existed as part of a complex web of relationships rather than as masters standing apart from nature. For children, education came not through formal institutions but through direct participation in adult activities. A young boy learned to ride by joining herders, gradually taking on more responsibility as his skills developed. A girl learned dairy processing by assisting her mother and older sisters, beginning with simple tasks and progressing to more complex techniques. Storytelling sessions transmitted history, ethical values, and practical knowledge disguised as entertainment. Some children from noble families received more formal instruction. They might learn to read and write the Uyghur-derived script adopted after unification, study military techniques, or master diplomatic protocols for interaction with foreign powers. After the establishment of the empire, sons of chiefs might be sent to distant parts of the realm to learn languages and customs that would later prove valuable in administration. The experience of women in Mongol society differed significantly from that in many contemporary civilizations. While gender roles were clearly defined, with men primarily responsible for herding, hunting, and warfare, while women managed the domestic sphere. These distinctions reflected practical division of labor rather than assumptions of female inferiority. Mongol women maintained significant economic power through their control of dairy production and processing, crucial sources of sustenance. They typically owned their own herds of animals, which remained their personal property even after marriage. They could initiate divorce, participate in family decisions, and in some cases rise to positions of considerable influence, particularly as widows, managing family holdings, or as regents for young sons. The night has grown very still now, the deep quiet of hours when most of the world sleeps. Imagine a Mongol encampment under starlight, the rounded shapes of gers like dark islands in a sea of silvered grass. Perhaps a single lamp still burns in one dwelling, where a grandmother teaches a young girl the precise technique for embroidering clan symbols into a ceremonial garment. Their quiet voices blend with the occasional soft nickering of horses and the whisper of wind through grass, sounds that have accompanied Mongol life for countless generations. As you drift towards sleep, consider how the seemingly simple patterns of daily existence, the circular movement of life within the ger, the seasonal migrations following ancient pathways, the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next, created the foundation for extraordinary historical achievements. The warriors who created history's largest land empire returned always to these basic rhythms, finding in them both purpose and meaning. The empire would rise and fall, but these fundamental patterns of life persisted. Long after conquests faded from living memory, Mongol families would continue to raise their children, tend their animals, and move with the seasons across the endless steppe, their existence a testimony to human adaptability and the enduring relationship between people and place. Sleep comes now, gentle as the falling snow that blankets the steppe in winter silence. Let your consciousness drift toward dreams accompanied by the distant sound of a morang kur playing a melody as ancient as the hills and as endless as the horizon. Perhaps in your dreams you will sit by a hearth fire in a gur, listening to tales of ancestors who rode with the great Khan, while outside the stars wheel through their eternal patterns above a world now changed forever. I leave you now to rest, beneath the shelter of history's gentle wings, to dream of felt walls and open skies, of horses running free across the steppe, and of lives lived in harmony with the eternal rhythms of earth and sky. In these deepest hours of night, when the boundary between worlds grows thin, let us explore the spiritual landscape that gave meaning to Mongol existence. Beyond conquest and daily survival lay a complex cosmos of beliefs, rituals, and sacred understandings, a spiritual framework that connected the mundane to the divine and placed human life within a larger pattern of meaning. Imagine standing on the vast Mongolian plateau as dawn approaches. The stars begin to fade as the eastern horizon lightens. The world hovers in perfect balance, neither day nor night, a moment of transition and possibility. This threshold between states mirrors the Mongol understanding of spiritual reality, a cosmos where the visible and invisible worlds exist in continuous relationship, where humans occupy the middle realm between heaven and earth. At the foundation of traditional Mongol spirituality lay a form of animism and shamanism common among steppe peoples. In this worldview, the universe teemed with spirits. Mountains housed powerful entities, rivers carried conscious force, trees contained living essence, animals embodied spiritual qualities, and ancestors remained present, though invisible. These spirits required respect, occasional offerings, and proper behavior from humans who shared their world. Above all, in the spiritual hierarchy, stood Tengri, the eternal blue sky, father of creation. Neither precisely a deity in the Western sense, nor merely a natural force, Tengri represented the ultimate cosmic power, infinite, omnipresent, and fundamentally connected to the fate of humans who lived beneath his vast expanse. The very word for sky and heaven were the same in Mongolian, reflecting this cosmic understanding. "Look to the eternal blue sky," an ancient saying advised, "and you will find both your origin and your destiny." Below Tengri in cosmic significance was Mother Earth, Etugin, who nurtured all living things and provided sustenance. The relationship between Skyfather and Earth Mother created a fundamental duality, masculine and feminine principles in perpetual interaction, generating the energy that sustained creation. Humans existed at the intersection of these cosmic forces, drawing life from both above and below. Fire held profound spiritual significance in Mongol tradition. The hearth fire represented family continuity, divine protection, and the mediating force between heaven and earth. Smoke rising through the Jir's central opening created a literal connection between human and celestial realms. Fire purified, transformed, and communicated with other worlds. To spit into fire, step over it, pour water onto it, or otherwise show disrespect was considered not merely impolite, but dangerous, an offense against both practical survival and cosmic order. Within this spiritual landscape, shamans served as crucial intermediaries. Neither precisely priests nor simply healers, shamans fulfilled multiple roles in Mongol society. They diagnosed and treated illness by addressing its spiritual causes. They communicated with ancestors and nature spirits. They interpreted omens and divined the future. Most dramatically, they conducted rituals involving altered states of consciousness, during which their spirits were believed to leave their bodies and travel to other realms to negotiate with powers beyond ordinary human reach. Imagine a nighttime shamanic ceremony. A fire burns in the center of a special gyre. The shaman, dressed in elaborate costume, heavy with symbolic elements, perhaps antlers representing connection to animal spirits, metal discs that catch firelight and reflect it like stars, strips of cloth in colors representing different cosmic levels, begins a rhythmic drumming. The beat grows more insistent, matched by chanting that starts low and gradually increases in intensity. As the ritual progresses, the shaman enters a trance state, body swaying, voice changing to reflect different entities speaking through the human vessel. Those gathered watch in respectful silence as the shaman journeys to other realms, perhaps battling malevolent spirits causing illness, retrieving lost soul fragments, or consulting ancestors about important decisions facing the community. This dramatic performance made visible the invisible interactions between worlds that Mongols believed occurred continuously. Shamanic practice was not a separate religion in the modern sense, but an integral aspect of daily existence. Small rituals punctuated ordinary activities. A drop of airag, fermented mare's milk, might be sprinkled toward the sky before drinking, acknowledging Tengri's precedence. Before hunting, prayers might be offered to the spirit of the animal being sought, explaining the human need and requesting permission. Mountain passes were marked with stone cairns, ovu, where travelers left small offerings, buttons, coins, strands of hair, to ensure safe passage. The Mongols maintained a rich tradition of divination, reading patterns in natural phenomena to discern divine intention and future possibilities. Shoulder blades of sheep might be heated until they cracked, with the resulting patterns interpreted by specialists. Unusual animal behaviors, cloud formations, or dreams were studied for guidance. These practices reflected a worldview where nothing occurred at random. All events carried meaning and purpose for those who could correctly interpret them. With the unification of the tribes under Genghis Khan, traditional spiritual practices encountered a new imperial context. Genghis himself maintained core shamanic beliefs while developing a more universalized concept of divine mandate. He was declared to have the protection of Tengri, positioning his rule as divinely sanctioned rather than merely politically achieved. The shaman Teb Tengri, Kokochu, played a crucial role in the early imperial period, using spiritual authority to support Genghis Khan's supremacy until their relationship eventually soured. One of Genghis Khan's most significant spiritual political innovations was his policy of religious tolerance throughout his growing empire. Unlike many conquerors who imposed their beliefs on subjected peoples, he exempted religious leaders from taxation, protected places of worship, and allowed all faiths to practice without interference as long as they acknowledged his political authority. This tolerance reflected both pragmatic governance and genuine curiosity. The Mongols encountered sophisticated religious traditions as they expanded beyond the steppe: Buddhism, Islam, Christianity in various forms, Taoism, Confucianism, Judaism, and numerous local beliefs. Rather than seeing these as threats to traditional Mongol spirituality, Genghis Khan and his successors viewed them as potential sources of spiritual power and knowledge that might benefit the empire. The night deepens around us as our spiritual exploration continues. Imagine a gathering of religious leaders at the Mongol court, Buddhist monks in saffron robes, Muslim imams in flowing garments, Nestorian Christian priests, Taoist sages, and Confucian scholars, alongside traditional Mongol shamans. Such interfaith dialogues actually occurred, sometimes in formal debates arranged by Khans curious about different paths to spiritual truth. During the empire's expansion, many Mongols maintained their traditional practices while adopting elements from other traditions. This spiritual flexibility reflected their pragmatic approach to life. If a practice or concept proved useful or compelling, it could be incorporated without necessarily abandoning earlier beliefs. This approach allowed for a remarkably smooth transition when, generations later, much of the Mongol world eventually embraced Buddhism as its primary formal religion. Buddhism had particularly profound influence on Mongol spiritual development. Initially entering Mongol awareness through contact with Uyghur and Chinese Buddhists, it gained significant traction during the reign of Kublai Khan in the late 13th century. The Tibetan form of Buddhism, with its cosmological complexity, ritual elements, and shamanic-like practices, found particular resonance with traditional Mongol spirituality. The Buddhism that eventually took root in Mongolia represented a distinctive synthesis. While incorporating core Buddhist concepts of karma, rebirth, and enlightenment, it maintained elements of traditional practice. Sacred mountains remained important, certain shamanic healing methods persisted, and Tengri was incorporated into the Buddhist pantheon as a protective deity. This spiritual adaptability demonstrated the Mongol genius for incorporation rather than replacement, adding new dimensions to their worldview without abandoning its foundations. As we journey through this spiritual landscape, consider how beliefs shaped daily existence for ordinary Mongols. A herder tracking missing animals might leave an offering at an ovu, seeking help from local spirits in his search. A woman experiencing difficulty in childbirth might be attended by both a practical midwife and a shaman addressing spiritual complications. A hunter would perform rituals of respect for the animals he killed, ensuring their spirits understood the necessity and preventing spiritual repercussions. The Mongol approach to death reflected their complex spirituality. Funeral practices varied by status and period, but generally emphasized returning the body to nature while addressing the continuing journey of the soul. Traditional sky burial, placing the body on a platform where elements and birds could reclaim it, acknowledged both practical realities and spiritual beliefs about liberation from physical form. For great leaders, including Genghis Khan himself, burial practices became more elaborate. Historical accounts suggest his funeral procession returned to a sacred area in Mongolia, with warriors riding over the burial site to conceal its exact location. Sacrifices of horses and other valuables accompanied the burial, providing for needs in the afterlife. The gravesite was considered so sacred that a large area around it became forbidden territory, eventually growing into a wildlife-rich region as human activities ceased. Dreams held special significance in Mongol spiritual understanding, not merely as psychological phenomena, but as actual experiences of the soul traveling while the body slept. Important dreams, particularly those featuring ancestors or spiritual entities, were carefully analyzed for guidance. Before major decisions or military campaigns, leaders might seek prophetic dreams, sometimes using rituals to increase the likelihood of meaningful night visions. The night has grown very still now. Imagine yourself sitting near a small fire on the open steppe, the Milky Way arching overhead in breathtaking clarity. This star road was seen by ancient Mongols as the pathway souls traveled after death, rising from Earth to join the cosmic expanse. The vastness above mirrors the vastness below, endless grassland meeting endless sky at the horizon, creating a perfect circle of existence. In this moment of contemplation, you might understand how the Mongol spiritual worldview emerged organically from their environment. The open steppe, with its lack of boundaries or barriers, encouraged a cosmology where worlds interpenetrated and spirits moved freely between realms. The harsh climate, where survival balanced constantly between abundance and scarcity, fostered beliefs emphasizing proper relationship with powerful natural forces. The nomadic lifestyle, following seasonal patterns rather than imposing fixed human structures, aligned naturally with a spirituality based on cycles and transformations rather than unchanging absolutes. As the Mongol Empire expanded beyond the steppe, spiritual influences flowed in multiple directions. While Mongols absorbed elements from cultures they encountered, they also transmitted aspects of their worldview to distant regions. Their emphasis on religious tolerance influenced governance in conquered territories. Their shamanic traditions affected how Buddhism developed in certain regions. Their cosmological understanding left subtle imprints on artistic and architectural expressions throughout their vast territories. The deepest hours of night surround us now, that threshold time when, according to Mongol belief, the veil between worlds grows most permeable. Shamans considered these hours particularly powerful for spiritual work, when communication with other realms became more possible. Perhaps in this liminal space between waking and dreaming, we too might glimpse something of the spiritual landscape that gave meaning to Mongol existence. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the whispered prayers of a Mongol family preparing for night's journey, simple words of gratitude to Tengri for another day of life, acknowledgement of ancestors watching from beyond, requests for protection during the vulnerable hours of slumber when the soul might wander. The hearth fire burns low, its embers glowing in the darkness like earthbound stars, maintaining the sacred connection between worlds even as consciousness fades. The spiritual journey we've traced, from ancient shamanic practices through imperial innovations to eventual Buddhist synthesis, represents not a linear progression toward higher religion, but a continuous adaptation to changing circumstances while maintaining core connections to the cosmos as Mongols understood it. In this adaptability lay a profound wisdom, recognition that spiritual truth, like the patterns of nomadic life, requires flexibility and movement rather than rigid adherence to unchanging forms. Sleep approaches now, gentle as prayer. As your consciousness merges with dreams, perhaps you will journey across spiritual landscapes that echo those of ancient Mongols, vast open spaces where heaven meets earth, where ancestors speak through wind and dream, where the boundaries between worlds grow permeable. In this liminal realm between sleeping and waking, between history and imagination, perhaps you will touch something of the eternal that gave meaning to those who rode beneath the endless blue sky so many centuries ago. Rest now, cradled between heaven and earth, as we prepare to continue our journey when next we meet, exploring new dimensions of the remarkable civilization that shaped so much of our world. Dear listener, as we complete the first half of our journey through the Mongol Empire, let your thoughts gently settle like autumn leaves drifting to earth. The steppe stretches endless in your mind's eye, horses grazing peacefully under a vast sky. Breathe deeply as you hover in this tranquil space between waking and dreaming. The distant mountains stand like silent guardians of ancient wisdom, while rivers trace silver paths through valleys where generations lived, loved, and dreamed before us. Sleep comes now, embracing you like the felt walls of a gyre on a winter night. Warm, secure, and connected to something timeless. Rest peacefully, knowing our journey will continue when you're ready, carrying you deeper into the remarkable story of a people who changed the world. Until then, may your dreams be as vast as the Mongolian sky and as peaceful as the whisper of wind through summer grass. As consciousness returns like the gradual brightening of dawn across the steppe, we resume our journey through the epic of the Mongol Empire. Having explored the unification of the tribes and the foundation of daily life, we now turn to the extraordinary period of expansion that transformed a unified nomadic people into rulers of the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Like a great river finding its inevitable path to the sea, Mongol power flowed outward from its heartland, forever changing the landscapes it touched. By 1206, when Genghis Khan completed the unification of the Mongol tribes, he faced a crucial decision. The newly unified nation required resources beyond what the traditional steppe territories could provide. The population had grown through incorporation of defeated tribes. Warriors who had fought for unification expected continued opportunities for conquest and rewards. The fragile unity might dissolve if these energies were not directed outward. The first major campaign beyond traditional territories targeted the Western Xia dynasty, also known as the Tangut Empire, a sophisticated Buddhist kingdom controlling valuable trade routes along the Silk Road. This initial expansion beyond the steppe tested Mongol military capabilities against a sedentary civilization with fortified cities and organized defenses. The campaign, lasting from 1205 to 1209, ended with Tangut's submission, though not outright conquest. The Western Xia became a vassal state, providing tribute, troops, and access to trade networks. Imagine a moonlit night in 1211 as Genghis Khan stands on a ridge gazing southward toward the lands of the Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China. Below him stretches his army, thousands of mounted warriors arranged in precise formation, their campfires creating a mirror image of the star field above. Tomorrow they will begin a campaign against one of the most powerful states in East Asia, a civilization that had manipulated steppe politics for generations, playing tribes against each other to maintain security. Now, for the first time, the Jin faced a unified nomadic force under singular leadership. The Jin campaign revealed both Mongol adaptability and the transformative effects of contact with sedentary civilizations. Traditional steppe warfare had focused on open field battles where mobility gave nomadic forces advantage. Now the Mongols confronted massive fortified cities and defensive works like the Great Wall, structures specifically designed to counter nomadic threats. Rather than abandoning their strengths, they incorporated new techniques while maintaining their core advantages. Chinese engineers who surrendered or were captured taught the Mongols siegecraft, how to build and operate catapults, trebuchets, and other artillery that could breach city walls. Rather than becoming less mobile, the Mongols developed methods to transport disassembled siege equipment between targets, maintaining their strategic flexibility. They also learned to divert rivers to flood defenses or deprive cities of water, and to use psychological warfare to encourage surrender without fighting. By 1215, the Jin capital of Zhongdu, near modern Beijing, had fallen. Though the Jin dynasty would continue resistance from a southern capital until 1234, this victory marked a fundamental shift in the balance of power in East Asia. The Mongols had demonstrated their ability to defeat sophisticated sedentary states on their home ground, a capability that would soon reshape much of the known world. The night deepens around us as we follow the expanding wave of Mongol influence. Imagine now a different scene, a caravan of merchants traveling the ancient Silk Road, carrying valuable goods between China and the wealthy Muslim kingdoms of Central Asia. For centuries, This vital trade route had been fragmented, with different powers controlling various segments and extracting tolls or tribute. Merchants faced constant danger from bandits and corrupt officials. The Mongol unification of the eastern portions of this route created unprecedented opportunities for secure long-distance trade, but also opened pathways for future conquest. In 1218, an incident occurred that would dramatically expand the scope of Mongol ambitions. Genghis Khan had sent a large trade mission to the powerful Khwarezmian Empire, which controlled vast territories in Central Asia, including modern Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and parts of Afghanistan. The Shah of Khwarezm, Muhammad II, suspicious of the merchants' true purpose, had them executed and sent back the head of the Mongol ambassador, a grave insult and direct challenge to Mongol authority. The response was swift and unprecedented in scale. In 1219, Genghis Khan personally led an invasion force of approximately 100,000 warriors into Khwarezmian territory, a campaign that would expand Mongol control thousands of miles westward and fundamentally alter the political landscape of the Islamic world. The Khwarezmian campaign demonstrated Mongol strategic genius at its height. Rather than taking a single path of invasion, Genghis divided his forces into multiple columns that converged on key targets from different directions, preventing the defender from concentrating forces. While the main army advanced through the Kizilkum Desert, a route considered impossible for large forces, smaller detachments swept through mountain passes, creating the impression of an overwhelming force attacking from all directions simultaneously. One by one, the great cities of the Khwarezmian Empire fell: Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench, Balkh, Merv, names that had symbolized Islamic civilization's highest achievements. Many surrendered after token resistance, having heard of the fate awaiting those who fought to the end. Others resisted fiercely and paid a terrible price in destruction and death. The Shah himself fled before the Mongol advance, eventually dying of exhaustion and despair on a small island in the Caspian Sea, his once mighty empire shattered beyond recovery. The night grows still as we contemplate this moment of world historical significance. The Mongol conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire brought them into direct contact with the wider Islamic world and the distant kingdoms of Europe. No longer merely a steppe power or even an East Asian empire, the Mongols now controlled territories stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, an unprecedented expanse under single authority. Two smaller expeditionary forces dispatched during this period further expanded Mongol reach. The generals Jebe and Subutai led approximately 20,000 warriors on a remarkable 3-year reconnaissance mission that circled the Caspian Sea, defeated Georgian and Armenian kingdoms in the Caucasus, and then shattered a combined Russes and Cuman force at the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, providing the first direct Mongol contact with European powers. This expedition demonstrated the extraordinary mobility and self-sufficiency of Mongol forces. Operating thousands of miles from their homeland with no supply lines in the modern sense, they maintained combat effectiveness through disciplined resource management, living off conquered territories while continuing to move at speeds that astounded their adversaries. When they finally returned to the main Mongol army in 1224, they had completed a circuit of approximately 5,500 miles, gathering crucial intelligence about lands that would become targets for future conquest. In 1226, as Genghis Khan's health began to decline, he launched a final campaign against the Tangut Empire, Western Sia, which had failed to provide promised military assistance during the Khwarezmian campaign. The resulting war ended with the complete destruction of the Tangut state and culture, a demonstration of the consequences of betraying agreements with the Mongol Empire. It was during this campaign in 1227 that Genghis Khan died, leaving an empire vastly larger than what had existed at his coronation just 2 decades earlier. The stars wheel slowly overhead as our story continues, marking the passage of time across the vastness of the steppe and the lands beyond. With Genghis Khan's death, leadership passed to his third son, Ögedei, who had been designated successor according to the founder's wishes. After a brief period of consolidation, Ögedei continued the pattern of expansion that had characterized his father's reign. In 1230, Mongol forces returned to the attack against the Jin dynasty, finally completing its destruction in 1234 with assistance from the southern Song dynasty of China, a temporary alliance that would prove short-sighted when Mongol attention eventually turned southward. This campaign solidified Mongol control over northern China, providing access to its agricultural wealth, technical expertise, and administrative traditions. The most dramatic expansion under Ögedei's rule came in the west, where a massive invasion of Europe was launched in 1236. Under the overall command of Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, and the tactical leadership of the brilliant General Subutai, this campaign represented the greatest westward extension of Mongol power, eventually reaching the Adriatic Sea and threatening the heart of European civilization. The invasion began with the conquest of Volga Bulgaria and the various principalities of Rus, predecessor states to Russia. In 1240, Kiev, the most magnificent city of the region and a center of Orthodox Christianity, fell to the Mongol assault, its destruction so complete that it ceased to function as a major urban center. For centuries, this traumatic event remains embedded in Russian historical consciousness, marking the beginning of what Russians call the Tatar yoke, a period of Mongol domination lasting more than 2 centuries. From the conquered Russian territories, the Mongol advance continued westward in 1241, splitting into multiple columns that invaded Poland, Moravia, Transylvania, and Hungary simultaneously. European defenses proved ineffective against Mongol mobility and tactics. At the Battle of Liegnitz, modern Legnica, Poland, a combined force of Polish, German, and Teutonic light-heavy cavalry was decisively defeated. 2 days later, and hundreds of miles away, the main Hungarian army suffered complete destruction at the Battle of Mohi, leaving Central Europe defenseless before the Mongol advance. By spring 1242, Mongol forces had reached the Adriatic Sea and were preparing to attack Austria and Germany when news arrived of Ögedei Khan's death. Following Mongol tradition, the princes of the blood were required to return to Mongolia for the election of a new great Khan. This fortunate coincidence for Europe resulted in the withdrawal of Mongol forces from most of the conquered territories, though they maintained control over Russia and established the Golden Horde as a lasting political entity in Eastern Europe. The night deepens further as we contemplate how differently world history might have unfolded had Ögedei lived another year or 2. Most historians believe the Mongols could have continued their conquest deep into Western Europe, facing no military force capable of effective resistance. The political, cultural, and religious landscape of the continent would have been fundamentally transformed, with incalculable consequences for global development. Even without conquering Western Europe, the Mongol Empire by the mid-13th century had achieved unprecedented geographical extent, encompassing the entirety of modern Mongolia, China, Korea, and most of Russia too. Central Asia, including Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan 3, the Caucasus region, including Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan 4, parts of Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and portions of Poland 5. Much of the Middle East, including Iran, Iraq, and parts of Turkey 6. Portions of Southeast Asia, including parts of Vietnam and Burma. This vast domain contained perhaps 1/5 of the world's population and encompassed an extraordinary diversity of cultures, religions, economies, and political traditions. The challenge of governing such an empire led to administrative innovations that would influence world history for centuries to come. Following Ögedei's death and a period of succession struggles, the empire entered its mature phase under Mongol Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, who ruled from 1251 to 1259. During this period, two major campaigns further expanded Mongol territories. In the Middle East, Mongol's brother Hulagu led an expedition that destroyed the assassin sect in their mountain fortresses, captured Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate that had ruled the Islamic world for 500 years, and threatened Mamluk Egypt before being checked at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, one of the first significant military defeats for Mongol forces. Simultaneously, another brother, Kublai, consolidated Mongol control in China and began the campaigns that would eventually lead to the conquest of the southern Song dynasty and establishment of the Yuan dynasty with Kublai as emperor of China. This dual focus, westward into the Islamic world and southward into China, reflected the empire's global strategic perspective, unprecedented in its scope and ambition. The death of Mongol Khan in 1259 marked the beginning of a new phase in Mongol history. For the first time, succession was not resolved peacefully, leading to civil war between his brothers Kublai and Arik Böke. Though Kublai emerged victorious by 1264, this conflict accelerated the empire's division into four major khanates that increasingly operated as independent states. The Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan and his descendants too, the Ilkhanate in Persia, modern Iran and Iraq, under Hulagu's line 3, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe under Batu's successors 4. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, governed by descendants of Genghis Khan's second son. While these khanates maintained cultural and familial connections, they developed increasingly divergent policies based on regional realities. The Yuan dynasty adopted many Chinese administrative practices. The Ilkhanate gradually embraced Islam and Persian culture. The Golden Horde maintained stronger connections to steppe traditions while developing complex relationships with Russian principalities and Eastern European powers. The Chagatai Khanate, controlling the central portion of the Silk Road, became a crucial link in trans-Eurasian trade networks. The night has grown very deep now, stars wheeling slowly overhead as we contemplate the rivers of conquest that flowed from the Mongol heartland across so much of the known world. Consider how this extraordinary expansion permanently altered global patterns of power, trade, and cultural exchange. Regions that had developed in relative isolation for centuries were suddenly connected through a single political system, creating unprecedented opportunities for the movement of people, ideas, technologies, and goods. Merchants could travel from Venice to China along routes protected by Mongol peace, the famous Pax Mongolica that created history's first truly integrated Eurasian economy. Religions spread along these same pathways, Buddhism moving westward, Islam expanding eastward, while Christianity found new footholds in regions previously closed to it. Scientific knowledge, agricultural techniques, artistic styles, and technologies flowed more freely than ever before, accelerating innovation throughout the connected regions. Even the devastation caused by conquest often led to new patterns of development. Cities destroyed by Mongol armies were frequently rebuilt according to new plans, incorporating elements from various cultural traditions. Agricultural lands reorganized under Mongol administration sometimes achieved greater productivity through the application of techniques from distant regions. Trade routes shifted to take advantage of the new political geography, creating prosperity in previously marginal areas while traditional centers sometimes declined. The Mongol conquests have often been portrayed primarily through the lens of destruction and indeed the human cost was enormous. Contemporary accounts describe cities reduced to ash, irrigation systems ruined, and entire populations massacred or displaced. Yet this perspective captures only part of a complex historical process. The Mongols were not merely destroyers, but also builders of new systems, connectors of previously separate worlds, and transmitters of knowledge across unprecedented distances. Sleep approaches now as our journey through the rivers of conquest reaches a temporary pause. As your consciousness begins to drift, imagine standing at the confluence of great rivers, the Yellow, the Yangtze, the Oxus, the Volga, the Tigris and Euphrates, waters that witnessed the passage of Mongol armies and the transformation of civilizations in their wake. These flowing waters, like history itself, carry both destruction and renewal, washing away the old while nourishing the new. The empire created through these conquests would not last in its united form, eventually fragmenting into successor states with their own distinctive trajectories. Yet the connections established during this period would endure, creating pathways of exchange that continue to shape our world today. The rivers of conquest, having carved new channels across the landscape of human civilization, left an enduring legacy long after their initial force had subsided. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the image of a world transformed, where the sound of hoofbeats gradually gives way to the bustling of merchant caravans, where battlefields become marketplaces, and where the descendants of conquerors and conquered alike forge new identities in the aftermath of empire. This cycle of destruction and renewal, of endings that contain new beginnings, forms the eternal rhythm of human history, a lullaby as ancient as civilization itself, singing you toward dreams of your own. As night's gentle embrace continues to hold you in its arms, we embark on a different kind of journey, not one of conquest and battle, but of exchange and connection. While Mongol armies carved political boundaries with sword and bow, merchants, pilgrims, diplomats, and artists were weaving a different kind of network. Threads of commerce and culture binding together distant lands in patterns that would endure long after the empire itself had faded. Imagine the sight of a great caravan, winding its way along ancient pathways. Hundreds of camels laden with silk, spices, porcelain, and precious metals move in stately procession across mountain passes and desert expanses. Merchants from a dozen different lands speak in multiple languages, exchanging not just goods, but stories, ideas, techniques, and beliefs. This scene, replicated thousands of times across the breadth of Eurasia during the Mongol era, represents perhaps the most enduring legacy of history's largest land empire, the creation of the world's first truly integrated transcontinental economy. The term Silk Road, coined much later by the German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen in 1877, describes not a single route, but a vast network of interconnected pathways stretching from China to the Mediterranean. This network had existed in various forms for thousands of years before the Mongols, but it had been fragmented by political boundaries, dangerous because of bandits and local conflicts, and made expensive by multiple layers of taxation and tribute. The Mongol conquest changed these conditions dramatically, creating what historians call the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, a period of relative stability and security across Eurasia that facilitated unprecedented levels of long-distance trade. Under Mongol rule, several key factors transformed the nature and scale of Eurasian exchange. First, political unification eliminated many traditional barriers to trade. Where merchants once had to negotiate with dozens of separate political entities, each with their own regulations, taxes, and potential hostility, they now operated within a single political system with more consistent rules and expectations. Though the empire eventually divided into 4 major khanates, these maintained enough cooperation to preserve the benefits of the system. Second, the Mongols created infrastructure specifically designed to facilitate movement and communication. The Yam system, a network of relay stations positioned approximately 25 miles apart along major routes, provided fresh horses, food, shelter, and protection for authorized travelers. Originally designed for government messengers, this system eventually extended privileges to merchants carrying special tablets, paisa, indicating imperial approval. Third, Mongol rulers actively encouraged trade through favorable policies. Merchants received protection, loans were available for commercial ventures, and counterfeiters of currency faced severe punishment. Genghis Khan's legal code, the Yasa, included specific provisions protecting and regulating commerce, including harsh penalties for robbery of merchants or interference with trade routes. Fourth, the Mongols facilitated cultural and linguistic exchange that made long-distance trade more practical. As people moved throughout the empire, whether as soldiers, administrators, deportees, or voluntary migrants, they brought languages, customs, and technical knowledge with them. Multilingual individuals became highly valued as translators and cultural intermediaries, reducing communication barriers to trade. The night deepens around us as we follow these ancient trade routes. Imagine now a caravanserai, one of the inn-like structures that dotted the Silk Road, providing overnight accommodation for traveling merchants. The rectangular building surrounds a central courtyard where camels and horses rest after the day's journey. Inside rooms along the walls, merchants from different lands share meals, exchange information about conditions ahead, and perhaps conduct small-scale trading among themselves. In the flickering light of oil lamps, a Chinese merchant might show a Persian counterpart delicate porcelain pieces, while nearby, a merchant from Venice examines Central Asian textiles, mentally calculating their value in European markets. What goods flowed along these revitalized networks? From China came silk in unprecedented quantities, so much that silk became affordable to wider segments of society throughout the connected regions. Porcelain, previously unknown in the West, began to appear in elite households from Persia to France. Tea, lacquerware, and sophisticated paper money represented other Chinese contributions to the expanding commercial world. Beyond physical goods, the networks carried technological knowledge with transformative impact. Paper money, invented in China centuries earlier, spread westward during this period, influencing financial practices throughout the connected regions. Printing technologies gradually moved along the same pathways, arriving in Europe after being refined through centuries of development in East Asia. Agricultural innovations traveled in multiple directions. New crop varieties, irrigation techniques, and tools that increased food production in their adopted regions. The night grows still as we contemplate how these exchanges transform daily life across Eurasia. Imagine dining tables in different lands during this period. In China, Middle Eastern taste influences appear in new spice dishes. In Persia, Chinese techniques for preparing rice create new culinary traditions. In Europe, Eastern spices become increasingly available, transforming cuisine previously limited to local herbs. Each meal represents a material demonstration of connections spanning thousands of miles. Medical knowledge flowed through these same networks. Persian physicians brought Greco-Arabic medical traditions eastward, influencing healthcare practices in China and Mongolia. Chinese herbal knowledge and diagnostic techniques moved westward, enriching medical practices in Central Asia and eventually Europe. The Mongol elite, pragmatic in their approach to health as to all matters, patronized successful healers regardless of their cultural or religious background, creating unprecedented opportunities for medical exchange. Perhaps most significantly, the improved communications under Mongol rule facilitated the spread of scientific knowledge. Astronomical observations made in observatories from Samarkand to Beijing were shared across distances that would have made such collaboration impossible in earlier eras. Mathematical innovations traveled along trade routes, including the eventual transmission of the Arabic numeral system, originally developed in India, to Europe, where it would revolutionize both commerce and scientific calculation. The night has grown deep around us, stars shining with particular brilliance in the clear air of the high plateaus where so many Silk Road travelers found themselves between the familiar territories of origin and destination. Consider how these exchanges of goods and knowledge were accompanied by transformations in how people understood their world. For the first time, comprehensive geographic knowledge became available across Eurasia. Travelers' accounts, like those of Marco Polo from Venice, Ibn Battuta from Morocco, or Rabban Bar Salma, a Nestorian Christian monk from China who traveled to Europe, introduced readers to previously unknown or misunderstood regions, expanding mental horizons along with commercial ones. Religious ideas traveled these same pathways, creating new patterns of spiritual geography. Buddhism strengthened its position in Mongolia and spread into regions of Central Asia, where it had previously declined. Islam expanded eastward, eventually becoming the dominant faith in regions that had previously followed various Central Asian practices, Buddhist traditions, or Nestorian Christianity. Christianity, in its Nestorian form, reached China in significant numbers for the first time, establishing communities that would nevertheless prove vulnerable to later political changes. The Mongol elite's approach to religion demonstrated the same pragmatism that characterized their governance generally. Genghis Khan and his immediate successors maintained traditional Mongol shamanic practices while extending protection to all major faiths. They often consulted religious leaders from different traditions, seeking beneficial spiritual influences, without exclusive commitment to any single system. This pluralistic approach created space for religious exchange and syncretism throughout the connected regions. Beyond physical goods, the networks carried technological knowledge with transformative impact. Paper money, invented in China centuries earlier, spread westward during this period, influencing financial practices throughout the connected regions. Printing technologies gradually moved along the same pathways, arriving in Europe after being refined through centuries of development in East Asia. Agricultural innovations traveled in multiple directions: new crop varieties, irrigation techniques, and tools that increased food production in their adopted regions. The night grows still as we contemplate how these exchanges transform daily life across Eurasia. Imagine dining tables in different lands during this period. In China, Middle Eastern taste influences appear in new spice dishes. In Persia, Chinese techniques for preparing rice create new culinary traditions. In Europe, Eastern spices become increasingly available, transforming cuisine previously limited to local herbs. Each meal represents a material demonstration of connections spanning thousands of miles. Medical knowledge flowed through these same networks. Persian physicians brought Greco-Arabic medical traditions eastward, influencing healthcare practices in China and Mongolia. Chinese herbal knowledge and diagnostic techniques moved westward, enriching medical practices in Central Asia and eventually Europe. The Mongol elite, pragmatic in their approach to health as to all matters, patronized successful healers regardless of their cultural or religious background, creating unprecedented opportunities for medical exchange. Perhaps most significantly, the improved communications under Mongol rule facilitated the spread of scientific knowledge. Astronomical observations made in observatories from Samarkand to Beijing were shared across distances that would have made such collaboration impossible in earlier eras. Mathematical innovations traveled along trade routes, including the eventual transmission of the Arabic numeral system, originally developed in India, to Europe, where it would revolutionize both commerce and scientific calculation. The night has grown deep around us, stars shining with particular brilliance in the clear air of the high plateaus where so many Silk Road travelers found themselves between the familiar territories of origin and destination. Consider how these exchanges of goods and knowledge were accompanied by transformations in how people understood their world. For the first time, comprehensive geographic knowledge became available across Eurasia. Travelers' accounts, like those of Marco Polo from Venice, Ibn Battuta from Morocco, or Rabban bar Sauma, a Nestorian Christian monk from China who traveled to Europe, introduced readers to previously unknown or misunderstood regions, expanding mental horizons along with commercial ones. Religious ideas traveled these same pathways, creating new patterns of spiritual geography. Buddhism strengthened its position in Mongolia and spread into regions of Central Asia, where it had previously declined. Islam expanded eastward, eventually becoming the dominant faith in regions that had previously followed various Central Asian practices, Buddhist traditions, or Nestorian Christianity. Christianity, in its Nestorian form, reached China in significant numbers for the first time, establishing communities that would nevertheless prove vulnerable to later political changes. The Mongol elite's approach to religion demonstrated the same pragmatism that characterized their governance generally. Genghis Khan and his immediate successors maintained traditional Mongol shamanic practices while extending protection to all major faiths. They often consulted religious leaders from different traditions, seeking beneficial spiritual influences, without exclusive commitment to any single system. This pluralistic approach created space for religious exchange and syncretism throughout the connected regions. Perhaps the most profound long-term consequence of the Silk Road networks under Mongol rule was biological exchange, both beneficial and catastrophic. Food crops traveled along trade routes, introducing new cultivation to various regions. Citrus fruits from East Asia gradually spread westward. Cotton cultivation extended its range. Persian irrigation techniques improved agricultural productivity in previously less fertile regions. This biological exchange helped support growing populations throughout the connected territories. However, the same networks that carried valuable goods and knowledge also transmitted disease. The most devastating example was the spread of the bubonic plague, the Black Death, which likely originated in Western China or Central Asia before traveling along trade routes to devastate populations from China to Europe in the mid-14th century. The unprecedented connectivity that brought such economic benefits also created vulnerability to pandemic disease, with mortality in some regions reaching 50% or higher during the peak of the plague. As dawn approaches in our narrative journey, we might reflect on the complex legacy of these silk threads that connected distant civilizations. The networks established or revitalized under Mongol rule created patterns of exchange that would endure long after the empire itself had fragmented. When Portuguese and Spanish explorers sought maritime routes to Asian markets in the 15th century, they were motivated by desire to access the goods they knew existed through the overland trade networks. Even as Ottoman control and the empire's dissolution had made those traditional routes more difficult to navigate. Many historians argue that the technological and scientific exchange facilitated by the Pax Mongolica laid crucial groundwork for the European Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and ultimately the global transformations that followed. While such direct causal links remain debated, it seems clear that the unprecedented movement of people, goods, and ideas during this period expanded possibilities throughout the connected regions, creating intellectual and commercial connections that transcended the empire's political boundaries and time frame. Sleep approaches now, gentle as camel bells on a distant caravan. As your consciousness begins to drift toward dreams, imagine yourself as a traveler on these ancient routes, perhaps resting in a caravanserai beneath a blanket of stars. The journey has been long, crossing mountains and deserts, encountering peoples whose languages and customs differ from your own. Yet in this moment of quiet, there is recognition of a shared humanity that transcends these differences. All travelers seeking safety, prosperity, and meaning in a world made simultaneously larger and smaller by the connections binding them together. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the image of silk threads stretching across mountains and deserts, connecting distant civilizations, not just through material exchange, but through the sharing of dreams, ideas, and aspirations. These threads, woven into the fabric of Eurasian history during the Mongol era, created patterns that would influence global development for centuries to come, delicate strands of connection that proved more durable than the empire that enabled their creation. The night deepens as our journey continues, carrying us eastward across mountains and deserts to the land the Mongols called Cathay, China, the ancient civilization that would become both the greatest prize and the greatest transformer of all, the Mongol Empire. As the constellations wheeled slowly overhead, we arrive at a moment when steppe traditions met millennia of settled culture, creating a unique synthesis under the rule of Kublai Khan, perhaps the most cosmopolitan leader of his age and certainly the most successful of Genghis Khan's heirs in adapting Mongol governance to settled civilization. Picture the summer palace at Shangdu, the Xanadu immortalized by Coleridge's poem in the year 1266. Beyond the marble halls and artificial lakes of the inner palace stretches an enclosed park, 5 miles in circumference, where deer and other game animals roam freely through meadows and woods. Within this paradise, Kublai has erected a traditional Mongol encampment, gurs, fashioned from bamboo and silk rather than felt, yet arranged according to ancient steppe patterns. Here, during summer months, the Khan retreats from Chinese court rituals to ride, hunt, and live according to the ways of his ancestors, maintaining connection to the nomadic traditions that formed the foundation of Mongol identity and power. This dual lifestyle, moving between Chinese imperial traditions and Mongol steppe practices, symbolized Kublai's broader approach to rule, maintaining core elements of Mongol identity while adopting and adapting the governmental systems of the conquered Chinese civilization. This cultural balancing act characterized the Yuan dynasty he established, creating a unique chapter in both Chinese and Mongol history. Kublai Khan's path to power began as a regional assignment. In 1251, his brother Mungke became Great Khan of the unified Mongol Empire and appointed Kublai as viceroy over Chinese territories already under Mongol control. This position allowed him to develop administrative experience and relationships with Chinese advisors, particularly the Confucian scholar Liu Bingzhong, who would significantly influence his approach to governance. When Mungke died in 1259 during a campaign against the southern Song dynasty, succession was not clearly established. Kublai, who was leading a separate army in China, found himself in competition with his younger brother Arik Böke, who controlled the Mongol heartland and traditional capital at Karakoram. The resulting civil war, 1260-1264, effectively ended the unified empire, as Kublai's victory came at the cost of permanently shifting his power base to China and loosening control over the western Kanates. By 1271, Kublai had consolidated enough authority to officially proclaim the Yuan dynasty, adopting Chinese imperial traditions while maintaining distinctive Mongol elements. This proclamation formalized what was already becoming reality, that the eastern portion of the Mongol Empire would develop as a Chinese-style state with Mongol leadership rather than as an extension of steppe governance. The most visible symbol of this transformation was Kublai's decision to build a new capital at what is now Beijing, called Dadu, Great Capital, during his reign. This city, designed by his Chinese and Muslim advisors, incorporated elements of traditional Chinese urban planning while accommodating Mongol cultural practices. The palace complex stood at the city's center, surrounded by governmental offices, with the broader urban area divided into districts for different populations and functions. Imagine standing in the great square before the imperial palace in Dadu. The architecture rises magnificent against the sky, red walls, golden roof tiles reflecting sunlight, marble bridges spanning artificial waterways. Guards in distinctive uniforms represent different ethnic components of the realm. Mongols in traditional deal robes but with Chinese-influenced decorations, Chinese soldiers in different regalia, and perhaps Muslim troops from Central Asia with their own distinctive appearance. The crowd waiting for imperial pronouncements includes people from across the vast empire, Chinese merchants and scholars, Muslim astronomers, perhaps European visitors, and Mongol nobles maintaining their distinctive dress and customs even. In this urban setting, the completion of Kublai's authority over China required the conquest of the southern Song dynasty, which had continued to rule south of the Yangtze River even as northern China fell under Mongol control. This campaign, lasting from 1267 to 1279, represented both the culmination of Mongol military expansion in East Asia and a landmark in the development of naval warfare. The final battle at Yamen in 1279 required the Mongols, traditionally land-based warriors, to develop naval capabilities to defeat the Song fleet. With this victory, China was unified under foreign rule for the first time in its long history. The governance system Kublai established to rule this vast territory represented a carefully balanced compromise between Mongol traditions and Chinese administrative practices. He maintained the Mongol decimal military organization and kept most senior military positions in Mongol hands. Simultaneously, he restored many elements of the traditional Chinese civil service, including competitive examination, though with quotas ensuring positions for Mongols, Central Asians, and other non-Chinese. This balancing act extended to the social organization of the realm. Kublai established a four-tier ethnic classification system. Peak Mongols, the highest status group, exempt from most taxation and holding key military positions. 2. Semu, literally colored eyes, various Central Asian, Middle Eastern, and European peoples who served as administrators, technical specialists, and merchants. 3. Han, northern Chinese who had been under Mongol rule since the Jin dynasty's fall. 4. Nanren, southern Chinese formerly under Song rule, assigned the lowest status and highest tax burden, while this system created clear hierarchies based on ethnicity rather than merit. Kublai's practical approach allowed talented individuals from any background to rise through service, creating a more meritocratic reality than the formal structures might suggest. His court included Chinese Confucian scholars, Tibetan Buddhist monks, Muslim astronomers and physicians, and even some Europeans in various roles, a cosmopolitan assembly unprecedented in its diversity. The night grows deeper as we explore cultural developments under Kublai's rule. Traditional Mongol shamanic practices continued among the elite, but Kublai himself showed particular interest in Tibetan Buddhism, forming a close relationship with the Sakya Pandita and his nephew, Phagpa. This priest-patron relationship became a model for later Mongol interactions with Tibetan religious leaders. While never abandoning his role as heir to Genghis Khan's spiritual mandate, Kublai's religious patronage helped Buddhism flourish throughout his domains. Simultaneously, Kublai maintained the Mongol tradition of religious tolerance established by Genghis Khan. Muslims served in his administration and maintained their religious practices freely. Nestorian Christians continued to practice throughout the realm. Taoism and Confucianism received imperial support alongside Buddhism. This pluralistic approach reflected both Mongol pragmatism and the multinational character of the empire itself. The economic policies of Kublai's reign demonstrated similar pragmatism and innovation. He maintained and expanded the communication and transportation infrastructure established during earlier Mongol rule, ensuring efficient movement of goods and information throughout his territories. The standardized paper currency system he implemented, building on earlier Chinese innovations but expanding their scale and scope, facilitated commerce across the vast domains. His government actively sponsored agricultural improvement, including the restoration and expansion of the Grand Canal to transport grain from the productive southern regions to the northern capital. Imagine the bustling commercial districts of Dadu during this period. Streets lined with shops selling goods from across Eurasia, silks and porcelain from southern China, spices from Southeast Asia, jewels from India, glassware from Persia, furs from the northern steppes. Merchants from different nations conduct business through multilingual interpreters or in simplified trade languages that had developed to facilitate such exchange. Paper money changes hands. Notes, backed by the authority of the Khan himself, accepted throughout his domains and increasingly beyond them through established exchange rates. Perhaps the most famous aspect of Kublai's reign was his openness to foreign visitors, particularly as described in Marco Polo's account of his time in Mongol service. While scholars debate the accuracy of some details in Polo's narrative, it captures an essential truth about the cosmopolitan nature of the Yuan court and its interest in knowledge and techniques from distant lands. Kublai employed people based on their abilities rather than their origins, creating unprecedented opportunities for talented foreigners throughout his domain. This openness extended to technological and scientific exchange. Astronomical instruments and mathematical knowledge from the Islamic world found their way to China during this period. Persian medical practices influenced Chinese healing arts, while Chinese pharmacology became available to Western physicians. Agricultural techniques crossed cultural boundaries, improving food production in various regions. The relative peace and established communication networks of the Pax Mongolica facilitated this exchange of knowledge, creating intellectual connections that would outlast the empire itself. The arts flourished under Kublai's rule, though in forms that sometimes departed from previous Chinese traditions. Drama and popular literature written in vernacular Chinese rather than classical forms developed significantly during this period. Chinese painting incorporated new techniques and motifs from Persian and Central Asian traditions while maintaining continuity with earlier song achievements. Porcelain production reached new heights with the famous blue and white wares developing through a combination of Chinese craftsmanship with cobalt pigments imported from Persia. Architecture during the Yuan dynasty reflected the multicultural nature of the regime. Traditional Chinese forms predominated in most construction, but elements from Central Asian and Middle Eastern traditions appeared in certain structures, particularly religious buildings. The city planning of Dadu incorporated both Chinese principles and practical accommodations for Mongol cultural preferences, creating an urban form that expressed the unique synthesis of the era. The night has grown very still now as we consider the challenges Kublai faced in maintaining this balanced system of governance. The fundamental tension between Mongol identity and Chinese imperial traditions created ongoing stresses. Mongol elites who had moved to China often adopted Chinese customs, language, and lifestyle over generations, creating concerns about loss of traditional Mongol martial virtues. Conversely, conservative elements within the Mongol leadership criticized Kublai for excessive accommodation of Chinese practices, seeing this as betrayal of Genghis Khan's legacy. This tension manifested in concrete policy debates. Should the government prioritize military expenditures to maintain Mongol power or invest in civil infrastructure to increase agricultural productivity and tax revenue? Should high positions be reserved for those of Mongol blood or opened to talent regardless of origin? Should the government actively promote Mongol cultural practices among the elite or allow natural assimilation to Chinese norms? These questions had no easy answers, and Kublai's pragmatic balancing act often satisfied neither traditionalists nor assimilationists completely. External challenges compounded these internal tensions. Kublai launched two massive naval expeditions against Japan in 1274 and 1281, both ending in disaster. The second due largely to a typhoon the Japanese called kamikaze, divine wind. Similar attempts to extend Mongol authority to Southeast Asia met with mixed results. Campaigns against Vietnam and Java suffered from difficult terrain and climate, achieving only temporary gains at great cost. These expensive failures strained both the treasury and the credibility of Mongol military supremacy. Despite these challenges, Kublai's reign represented a remarkable achievement in cross-cultural governance. By the time of his death in 1294, he had created a functioning synthesis of Mongol and Chinese traditions that would continue under his successors for nearly a century. The Yuan dynasty he established lasted until 1368, when the native Chinese Ming dynasty overthrew Mongol rule, but its influence on both Chinese and Mongol development persisted far longer. As dawn approaches in our narrative journey, let us consider the broader significance of Kublai Khan's achievement. Unlike many conquerors throughout history, he demonstrated the ability to adapt governance to local conditions while maintaining core elements of his own cultural tradition. Rather than simply imposing Mongol practices on China or abandoning Mongol identity to become a Chinese-style emperor, he created a genuine synthesis that acknowledged the value in both traditions. This achievement reflected the broader Mongol genius for incorporation rather than replacement. The same approach that allowed them to adopt military technologies, administrative systems, and cultural elements from various conquered civilizations while maintaining their own core identity. In Kublai's case, this flexibility allowed him to rule effectively over a population that vastly outnumbered his Mongol followers, creating stability that lasted generations rather than collapsing immediately upon conquest. Sleep approaches now, gentle as the morning mist rising over the lakes of Shangdu. As your consciousness begins to drift toward dreams, imagine yourself standing on the walls of Dadu as the sun sets over the capital of Kublai's realm. Below you, lanterns begin to illuminate the streets where people from across Eurasia move through markets, temples, and homes. The blue banner of the Mongols flies above the palace, casting its shadow over an ancient civilization transformed by the vision of a ruler who stood between worlds. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the image of Kublai Khan moving between his Chinese palace and Mongol encampment, embodying in his person the balance between traditions that characterized his reign. This capacity to exist between worlds, to value what each has to offer while maintaining core identity, perhaps offers wisdom that transcends its historical moment, speaking to modern questions of cultural interaction in an increasingly connected world. As night's velvet darkness envelops you once more, our journey through Mongol history takes a different direction, away from the thundering armies and imperial thrones that often dominate historical narratives toward the essential but frequently overlooked role of women in shaping the Mongol world. Behind the conquests and diplomatic triumphs, beyond the trade routes and religious transformations, women of remarkable capability and influence helped create, sustain, and guide the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The soft glow of a butter lamp illuminates the interior of a gyre, where a woman sits instructing her children in the stories of their ancestors. Her face, weathered by sun and wind, holds both strength and wisdom. Though history books may never record her name, she is engaged in a crucial act of cultural transmission, preserving the values, practical knowledge, and spiritual understanding that will shape the next generation. This scene, repeated countless times across the steppe, formed the foundation upon which all Mongol achievements were built. Mongol society before, during, and after the empire period granted women roles and rights that often surprised visitors from other civilizations. While gender roles were clearly defined, with men primarily responsible for warfare, hunting, and external political relations, while women managed domestic affairs, animal breeding, and family economics, these distinctions reflected practical division of labor rather than assumptions of inherent inequality. Women maintained significant economic power, legal rights, and social influence within this nomadic society. The ribs of the ger may be the husband's strength, but the felt covering is the wife's protection, goes a traditional Mongol saying, acknowledging the complementary roles that sustained family life on the steppe. Let us begin our exploration with perhaps the most influential woman in Mongol history, Hoelun, mother of Genghis Khan. When her husband Yesuge was murdered and their clan abandoned the widow and her children, Hoelun's extraordinary resilience and determination ensured their survival against overwhelming odds. She taught her children to hunt small game, gather wild roots and berries, and maintain their dignity despite their desperate circumstances. More than mere physical survival, Hoelun instilled in young Temujin, later Genghis Khan, the values that would shape his leadership: resilience in the face of adversity, loyalty to those who remained faithful, and determination to reclaim what rightfully belonged to him. Her famous admonition to her quarreling sons, comparing them to single arrows easily broken versus a bundle of arrows unbreakable when bound together, provided a metaphor for unified strength that would later guide the unification of the Mongol tribes. Even after her son rose to supreme power, Hoelun maintained significant influence, often counseling moderation and wisdom when Genghis might have acted harshly. When he ordered the execution of a half-brother who threatened his authority, it was Hoelun who expressed the moral and practical concerns about killing kin, shaping how Genghis understood the responsibilities of leadership. Equally significant in Genghis Khan's life was his primary wife, Berta. Kidnapped by the Merkid tribe shortly after their marriage, her rescue became Genghis Khan's first significant military campaign, cementing alliances that would prove crucial to his rise to power. Throughout his life, Berta remained his most trusted counselor, with historical records suggesting he rarely made major decisions without consulting her. The question surrounding the paternity of her first son, Yochi, born shortly after her rescue from captivity, created succession issues that would influence imperial politics for generations. Yet the fact that Genghis Khan accepted Yochi as his son, regardless of biological uncertainty, demonstrated both personal loyalty to Berta and a practical approach to family politics that transcended mere bloodlines. The night deepens around us as our exploration continues. Imagine the encampment of a Mongol army on campaign, not just warriors, but a complete society on the move, with women playing essential roles in maintaining both practical operations and cultural continuity. While men fought in battles, women managed the complex logistics of nomadic movement, assembling and disassembling dwellings, preparing and preserving food, making and repairing clothing and equipment, caring for the horses and livestock that sustained the group, and transmitting cultural knowledge to children born during these campaigns. Unlike many contemporary armies that segregated women from military operations, Mongol forces incorporated them as integral to their success. Some women, particularly from elite families, received training in riding and archery similar to men, allowing them to defend encampments if necessary. Others developed expertise in field medicine, treating wounds and illnesses that would otherwise have depleted fighting strength. This integration of women into military campaigns partially explains the Mongols' ability to sustain operations far from their homeland for extended periods. Beyond these practical contributions, certain women rose to positions of remarkable political influence during the imperial period. Among the most powerful was Turagene Khatun, who became regent of the Mongol Empire from 1241 to 1246, following the death of her husband, Ögedei Khan, son of Genghis Khan. During her regency, she maintained imperial unity during a vulnerable transition period, managed relations between competing factions, and eventually secured the election of her son, Guyuk, as Great Khan. Turagene demonstrated political acumen in her appointment of administrators and handling of internal Mongol politics. She placed her trusted advisor Fatima, a Shiite Muslim woman captured during the Khwarezmian campaign, in a position of significant influence, demonstrating the opportunities sometimes available to capable women regardless of their origin. Though later chroniclers, particularly those unsympathetic to her son's reign, criticized her governance, her achievement in maintaining imperial stability during an extended interregnum speaks to her effective leadership. An even more remarkable case of female rule came with Sorghaghtani Beki, a Karaite princess who married Genghis Khan's youngest son Tolui. Following her husband's early death, she declined remarriage, which would have been expected under traditional practices, to focus on advancing her son's positions. Through careful political maneuvering, exceptional administrative skill, and strategic alliance building, she positioned her four sons to become among the most powerful figures in Mongol history. Mungke became Great Khan, Kublai founded the Yuan dynasty in China, Hulagu established the Ilkhanate in Persia, and Arik Burka controlled the Mongol heartland for a period. Contemporary sources from multiple cultures praised Sorghaghtani's intelligence and capability. The Persian historian Juvaini called her the most remarkable woman in the world, while a visiting European diplomat described her as extremely intelligent and able and the most respected among all the Tatars. Her religious tolerance: she was a Nestorian Christian who supported Buddhist, Muslim, and other religious establishments, influenced her son's approaches to governing diverse populations, and contributed to the religious pluralism characteristic of the Mongol Empire. The night has grown very still as our narrative continues. Picture now a different scene: the court of Doks Khatun, wife of Hulagu Khan, and the most powerful woman in the Ilkhanate of Persia during the mid-13th century. Like Sorghaghtani, she was a Nestorian Christian who maintained her faith while supporting religious freedom throughout the realms her husband conquered. When Baghdad fell to Mongol forces in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate, her intervention reportedly saved the city's Christian population from the general massacre that followed. Following Hulagu's death in 1265, Doks maintained significant influence during the transition to his son Abaka's rule. Her example demonstrates how women in the Mongol imperial family could shape policy, particularly regarding religious matters and the treatment of conquered populations. Her story also illustrates the complex religious dynamics of the empire: a Christian woman wielding influence in a Khanate that would eventually adopt Islam, within a broader imperial structure that maintained official religious neutrality. In the Yuan dynasty established by Kublai Khan in China, Mongol women maintained aspects of their traditional independence, even as they adapted to Chinese imperial settings. Chabi, Kublai's primary wife, counseled moderation in dealing with Chinese subjects and reportedly influenced the Khan to reject advisors who proposed harsh measures such as mass killing or enslavement of northern Chinese populations during the initial conquest. She also played a significant role in the Khan's patronage of Tibetan Buddhism, which would have lasting cultural impacts throughout East Asia. The social position of Mongol women in the imperial family contrasted starkly with traditional Chinese gender roles. Mongol princesses maintained the right to own property independently, choose or refuse marital partners in some cases, participate in political discussions, and appear publicly unveiled, practices that scandalized Chinese Confucian observers who held fundamentally different views on proper female behavior. These differences extended to official court activities. During diplomatic receptions, Mongol women of the imperial family often sat alongside male relatives rather than remaining secluded as Chinese court practice would have dictated. European visitors like Marco Polo noted with surprise the relative freedom of elite Mongol women compared to high-status women in other Asian civilizations they had encountered. Beyond the imperial family, ordinary Mongol women maintained economic roles central to nomadic prosperity. They controlled dairy production, processing milk into a variety of products essential to the Mongol diet, including aerag, fermented mare's milk, cheese, butter, and dried curds. These products not only provided crucial nutrition, but also served as trade goods and gifts for cementing social relationships. Women typically owned their own herds of animals, which remained their personal property even after marriage, providing economic independence rare in many contemporary societies. The textile arts fell primarily within women's domain, with significant economic and cultural importance. Women processed wool into felt for jia coverings, wove or embroidered decorative textiles, and created clothing adapted to the harsh steppe environment. These skilled crafts combined practical necessity with artistic expression, preserving cultural motifs and techniques through generations. The textiles women produced often incorporated symbols connecting daily life to spiritual beliefs, integrating practical objects into the broader cosmological understanding that gave meaning to Mongol existence. The night grows deeper as we consider how the Mongol conquest affected women in conquered territories, a mixed legacy of disruption and opportunity. The initial violence of conquest often specifically targeted women, with sexual violence and enslavement common practices during the 13th century campaigns. Yet the subsequent Pax Mongolica created conditions where women sometimes found new possibilities within the more fluid social arrangements of the post-conquest period. In many regions, the Mongols disrupted traditional gender hierarchies simply by introducing different expectations and precedents. Women from conquered populations who possessed valuable skills, whether in administration, crafts, medicine, or commerce, sometimes found opportunities for advancement under Mongol rule that wouldn't have existed previously. The Mongols' general meritocratic approach and willingness to incorporate talent regardless of origin occasionally extended across gender boundaries as well, particularly for women from elite families who gained education typically restricted to males. The legal status of women under the Yasa, Genghis Khan's legal code, offered certain protections regardless of ethnic origin. Adultery was severely punished, and the kidnapping of women, a traditional practice in steppe warfare, became prohibited within Mongol territories. Widows maintained rights to their husband's property, and women could initiate divorce under certain circumstances. While these provisions didn't create gender equality in the modern sense, they established protections that sometimes exceeded those in neighboring civilizations. In this seemingly mundane scene lies perhaps the most enduring contribution of Mongol women, the preservation and transmission of cultural identity through periods of enormous change. As Mongol men increasingly adopted customs and practices from conquered civilizations, particularly in China and Persia, women often became the primary conservators of traditional knowledge, language, and spiritual practices. They maintained the rhythms of nomadic life, even when political circumstances pushed toward sedentary patterns, preserving the distinctive worldview that had emerged from centuries of adaptation to the steppe environment. This cultural conservation proved crucial during periods of imperial decline and subsequent domination by other powers. When the Yuan dynasty fell to the Ming in 1368, when the Ilkhanate fragmented in the 14th century, when the Golden Horde eventually lost control over Russian territories, it was largely women who ensured that Mongol cultural identity survived these political reversals. Through their management of daily life, their storytelling, their textile arts, and their teaching of children, they preserved the core elements of Mongolian identity that would eventually support cultural revival in later centuries. As dawn approaches, in our narrative journey, we might reflect on the complex legacy of these women who shaped the Mongol world through both extraordinary and ordinary actions. Their stories challenge simplistic notions about traditional gender roles in nomadic societies and remind us that historical impact occurs not only through dramatic public actions, but also through the continuous, often unrecorded work of maintaining the cultural fabric that sustains communities through change. Sleep approaches now, gentle as the lullabies Mongol mothers sang to children across the vast expanse of the empire. As your consciousness begins to drift toward dreams, imagine yourself sitting within a gyre as a grandmother tells stories to children gathered around the central hearth. Her words carry across generations, connecting these young listeners to ancestors who rode with Genghis Khan, to grandmothers who counseled Khans and preserved cultural knowledge through conquest and defeat, to women who maintained the rhythms of nomadic life through imperial glory and decline. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the image of these daughters of the felt walls, women whose strength, wisdom, and perseverance helped create and sustain one of history's most remarkable civilizations. Their legacy lives on in the enduring cultural identity of the Mongolian people, in the distinctive synthesis they created between nomadic traditions and settled civilizations, and in the example they provide of female agency exercised within and sometimes beyond traditional boundaries.